The first gray light of dawn found Li Wei already on his knees in the dirt, his fingers digging into soil that felt more like powdered bone than earth. His stomach twisted with a familiar emptiness, a hollow ache that had become as constant as the sunrise over the withered fields of his family's plot. The rice stalks stood thin and yellowed, their leaves curling at the edges like burnt paper. He could count every stalk, 87, a pathetic number that mocked the months of labor he'd poured into this patch of ground. Li Wei's hands moved with the mechanical rhythm of desperation. He scooped handfuls of dry soil, sifting it through his fingers, searching for some hidden moisture, some sign that the gods hadn't completely abandoned this corner of the Yan Empire. Sweat beaded on his brow despite the morning chill, tracing lines through the dust coating his face. He was 19 years old, but his back already carried the permanent curve of a man twice his age, bent by hunger and hopelessness. As he dug deeper near a particularly stubborn weed, his fingernails scraping against a buried stone, the world suddenly fractured. A shimmering overlay bloomed across his vision, like heat haze rising from a summer road, but colder, sharper. Glitched lines of light danced at the edges, flickering between blue and gold. Text appeared in floating characters that seemed to hover just before his eyes, written in a script he somehow understood despite never having seen it before. System initializing. The characters stuttered, breaking apart and reforming. Mandate grinder active. Li Wei froze, his breath catching in his throat. He blinked rapidly, expecting the vision to vanish like a mirage. But it remained, persistent as the hunger in his belly. The interface showed a simple layout, his own name at the top, followed by blank fields labeled strength, agility, intelligence, and 3 others he couldn't decipher, authority, prestige, legitimacy. All showed zeros or dashes. At the bottom, a section titled Active Quest sat empty. Is this madness? He thought, his heart hammering against his ribs. Has hunger finally stolen my wits? He reached out a trembling hand, half expecting to touch the glowing text. His fingers passed through empty air, but the display remained. A strange warmth spread through his chest, unfamiliar and unsettling. For a moment, he simply knelt there, staring at the impossible overlay while the morning birds began their chorus in the distant trees. The sound of approaching hooves shattered his paralysis. Li Wei scrambled to his feet, wiping his dirty hands on his threadbare trousers. Down the dirt path that wound through the village's fields came Magistrate Zhang's procession. The magistrate rode a sleek black horse, its coat groomed to a shine that mocked the dust coating everything else. 4 guards flanked him, their armor clinking with each step, expressions bored beneath their helmets. Behind them trailed 2 clerks with scrolls and abacuses, their faces pinched with self-importance. Villagers began emerging from their huts, their movements slow with dread. Old man Chen hobbled out leaning on his grandson's shoulder. Widow Feng clutched her infant daughter close, her eyes already filling with tears. They gathered in a loose semicircle before the magistrate's horse, heads bowed in the required posture of submission. Magistrate Zhang reined in his mount, the animal snorting and stamping its hooves. He was a man of middle years with a carefully trimmed beard and robes of deep blue silk that must have cost more than the entire village's annual harvest. His eyes swept over the gathered peasants with the disinterest of a man examining livestock. Tax collection day, he announced, his voice carrying the bored authority of routine. The empire requires its due. Clerk Zhao, begin the assessment. As the magistrate spoke, Li Wei's glitched interface flickered. New text appeared, overlaying Zhang's figure. Magistrate Zhang, local authority. Imperial legitimacy, 45/100. Authority, 60/100. Prestige, 30 out of 100 foot. Beneath the stats, golden characters formed. New quest, undermine local authority. Objective, reduce magistrate's legitimacy by 5 points. Reward, 1 strength point, basic farming technique, advanced, ... Li Wei's mind raced. Legitimacy. The word echoed in his thoughts. What did it mean? How did one reduce it? He watched as Clerk Zhao unrolled a scroll and began calling names, announcing tax amounts that made the villagers gasp. The numbers were higher than last season, much higher. This can't be right, old man Chen protested weakly. The harvest was poor. We barely have enough to. Enough. Magistrate Zhang cut him off. The empire's needs do not wait for your poor harvests. Pay in grain or coin. Those who cannot will provide labor or property. Li Wei felt a cold anger settle in his chest. He'd heard the rumors, whispered in the dark when the guards weren't listening. Magistrate Zhang had been skimming from the imperial grain reserves for years, selling the surplus to merchants while villagers starved. The magistrate's legitimacy score glowed in his vision, 45. Not high. Vulnerable. An idea began to form, fragile as a spider's web. As Clerk Zhao approached him, Li Wei adopted the slack-jawed expression he'd perfected over years of playing the harmless simpleton. He let his shoulders slump, his eyes go slightly unfocused. Li Wei, the clerk read from his scroll. 1 silver tael or equivalent in grain. That's more than my whole plot is worth, Li Wei mumbled, letting his voice waver with what he hoped sounded like confused distress. Do you have it or not? I heard something, Li Wei said, louder now, turning to address not just the clerk but the gathered villagers. He made his voice carry the tone of someone sharing harmless gossip. Yesterday, at the market, I heard merchants talking. They said the magistrate's granaries are so full the doors barely close. A ripple went through the crowd. Magistrate Zhang's horse shifted uneasily. What nonsense is this? Zhang demanded, but Li Wei continued, speaking faster now, layering innocence over his words like a cloak. They said there's grain enough to feed the whole county through winter, just sitting there. And I thought, if we're so poor, why is there so much grain in the magistrate's stores? He blinked slowly, playing the fool connecting dots too large for his simple mind. Unless some of our taxes went there instead of to the empire. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Every villager was staring at Magistrate Zhang now, their expressions shifting from fear to dawning anger. Widow Feng's tears stopped flowing. Old Man Chen stood a little straighter. Magistrate Zhang's face flushed dark red. You dare accuse? I'm not accusing. Li Wei interrupted with practiced idiocy. I'm just repeating what I heard. Maybe the merchants were lying. But they seemed so sure. He let his voice trail off, watching the interface. Magistrate Zhang's legitimacy score flickered, 44. 43, 42. It dropped steadily as the villagers' murmurs grew louder. They weren't shouting, years of oppression had taught them better, but their whispered exchanges carried sharp edges. My cousin works at the county granary, someone muttered. The magistrate's new summer house, where did he get the silver? My son saw carts leaving the reserves at night. The score hit 40, then stabilized. The quest notification in Li Wei's vision pulsed gold, objective complete. A warmth flooded his body, starting in his chest and spreading outward to his limbs. It wasn't the weak warmth of sunlight or the false heat of fever, this was something solid, substantial. He felt his muscles tighten, the chronic ache in his back easing. When he flexed his fingers, they moved with a new surety. Simultaneously, knowledge blossomed in his mind. Not just how to plant seeds in straight rows or when to irrigate, but deeper understandings, how to read the soil's moisture by its color, how to companion plant to deter pests, how to rotate crops to preserve fertility. Basic farming technique, advanced. The knowledge settled into place as if he'd studied it for years. Most astonishing of all, the withered rice stalks around him seemed to perk up. Not dramatically, they didn't turn green and lush, but the curling leaves relaxed slightly. The yellow tinge lightened at the edges. It was subtle, something no one else would notice, but to Li Wei, who had stared at these plants every day for months, the change screamed like a shout. Magistrate Zhang had regained his composure, but his authority had been cracked. Enough of this foolishness, he barked. The taxes stand. You have 3 days to pay. Those who cannot will be dealt with according to imperial law. He wheeled his horse around, the guards falling into formation behind him. But the departure lacked its earlier swagger. The villagers watched them go with expressions that held less fear and more calculation. As the sound of hooves faded, Li Wei found himself surrounded. Not by angry villagers, but by curious ones. Where did you hear that about the granaries? Old Man Chen asked, his eyes sharp. Just market talk, Li Wei said, retreating back into his simpleton persona. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe you didn't, Widow Feng said softly, her gaze lingering on him a moment too long before she turned away. The crowd dispersed slowly, talking in low tones. Li Wei waited until he was alone again in his field before checking his interface. New text had appeared. Mandate siphoned, 5 points. Strength, +1. New skill, basic farming technique, advanced. New quest, reduce magistrate's authority by 10 points. Warning, system activity may attract attention. The last line glowed with a faint red tinge. Li Wei stared at it, the morning sun now fully risen and beating down on his back. He felt stronger than he had in years, his mind clear, his body responding with a vitality he'd almost forgotten. The rice stalks around him stood a little straighter, their slight improvement a secret victory. But the warning echoed in his thoughts. Attention from whom? The magistrate already suspected something, he'd seen it in Zhang's eyes as he rode away. Or something else? Something that watched for glitches in the world's order. Li Wei knelt again, his hands sinking into the soil. It felt different now, not just dirt, but potential. The mandate grinder interface hovered at the edge of his vision, a silent partner in whatever game he'd just begun to play. Magistrate Zhang's authority score floated in his memory, 60/100. 10 points to reduce. He had no plan yet. No grand scheme. But for the first time in his life, Li Wei looked at the empire that had crushed him beneath its heel and saw not an immovable mountain, but something with cracks. And he had just discovered he could widen them. The sun rose over Li Wei's small plot of land, casting long shadows across the newly tilled soil. For 3 days now, he had worked with a quiet intensity that surprised even himself. His hands moved with a precision born of the advanced farming knowledge that now flowed through him, knowledge that felt both alien and intimately familiar, as if he'd been farming for decades rather than just scraping by as a destitute peasant. Between planting rows of millet, Li Wei experimented with the mandate grinder interface. A subtle flicker at the corner of his vision would appear when he focused on people or structures, revealing their hidden statistics. Old Man Chen, who shuffled past with his walking stick each morning, showed village influence, 2 out of 100 and trustworthiness, 65 out of 100. Widow Feng, carrying her infant daughter to the communal well, displayed resilience, 70 out of 100 but hope, 30 out of 100. The numbers told stories Li Wei had never considered before. On the 4th morning, his attention turned to the village granary. The squat, mud brick structure stood at the settlement center, its thatched roof sagging in one corner where rainwater had pooled during the last storm. When Li Wei focused, golden text shimmered into view. Structure, village granary. Imperial prestige, 15/100. Condition, poor. Notes, neglect reflects poorly on local administration. Low prestige reduces grain preservation efficiency by 40%. Li Wei's breath caught. The system wasn't just about people, it quantified the very structures that represented imperial authority. The granary's pathetic prestige score explained why last year's harvest had spoiled faster than usual, why Magistrate Zhang's promises of improved storage had amounted to nothing but empty words. He was contemplating this when shouts erupted from the irrigation ditch that ran along the western edge of the village fields. Li Wei straightened, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. The argument grew louder, voices sharp with the tension that came from too little water and too many hungry mouths. By the time he reached the ditch, a dozen villagers had gathered. Farmer Wu, a burly man with forearms thick from years of labor, stood chest to chest with Old Man Chen's grandson, a hot-tempered youth named Hong. Between them, the irrigation channel ran nearly dry, just a trickle of muddy water seeping through cracked earth. "My fields are upstream," Hong shouted, his face flushed. "The water belongs to me by right. And my family will starve if my crops wither." Farmer Wu shot back. "Your grandfather would be ashamed of your greed." Li Wei watched as the system flickered, analyzing the conflict. Over Hong's head, he saw temper, 85 out of 100 and reasonableness, 20 out of 100. Farmer Wu showed desperation, 90 out of 100 and patience, 10 out of 100. The numbers told him this wouldn't end well unless someone intervened. For a moment, Li Wei considered walking away. The old Li Wei would have, a peasant didn't involve himself in disputes that might draw the magistrate's attention. But the new Li Wei felt something stir within him, a confidence born of stolen mandate points and knowledge that shouldn't belong to someone of his station. "The ditch isn't dry because of upstream rights," Li Wei said, his voice cutting through the argument. Both men turned, their expressions shifting from anger to confusion at seeing the usually quiet peasant speaking up. Old man Chen, who had arrived leaning on his stick, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Li Wei knelt by the irrigation channel, his fingers tracing the cracked earth. The advanced farming knowledge flowed through him, memories of proper channel maintenance, of understanding water flow and soil composition. "Look here," he said, pointing to a section where the ditch wall had collapsed inward. "The blockage isn't upstream. It's here, where the channel narrows. Sediment has built up over seasons because no one's cleared it properly." He didn't wait for permission. Using a broken hoe he found nearby, Li Wei began digging at the collapsed section. The villagers watched in silence as he worked with an efficiency that seemed impossible for someone who'd always been among the poorest farmers. His movements were economical, each strike of the tool dislodging just the right amount of earth, each scoop removing sediment without weakening the ditch walls further. After 20 minutes of work, water began to flow more freely. Not a flood, but a steady stream that would reach all fields if properly managed. "The problem isn't who gets the water," Li Wei said, standing and wiping mud from his hands. "It's that there isn't enough channel to carry what the river provides. If we widen this section here," he pointed to a bend in the ditch, "and create a simple system with bamboo pipes, the water will reach everyone's fields." He described the plan in detail, drawing diagrams in the dirt with a stick. The advanced farming technique knowledge provided specifics: what diameter of bamboo would work best, how to angle the pipes for maximum flow, how to create simple gates to control distribution. Farmer Wu's desperation score dropped to 60 out of 100 as he listened. Han's temper fell to 50 out of 100. Other villagers murmured, some nodding, others looking skeptical. Old man Chen spoke first. "The boy makes sense. My grandfather spoke of such systems before the last magistrate tore them out for his own fields." One by one, the villagers agreed. Widow Feng, holding her sleeping daughter, said softly, "My husband would have supported this. He always said we should work together, not fight over scraps." As consensus formed, golden text appeared before Li Wei. Achievement, village consensus reached. Reward, village influence +1. Current village influence, 1 out of 100. Note, influence affects how readily villagers will follow your lead and support your actions. A warm sensation spread through Li Wei's chest, different from the physical strength he'd gained from siphoning mandate. This felt like respect. Something he'd never experienced in his 22 years of life. But even as the villagers began discussing when to gather bamboo for the irrigation project, Li Wei's mind was already working on his next move. The system had taught him that direct actions yielded greater rewards, and he had a quest to complete: reduce Magistrate Zhang's authority by 10 points. That afternoon, while helping clear the irrigation ditch with several other villagers, Li Wei began his work. He didn't attack Zhang directly, that would be foolish for a peasant. Instead, he worked through implication and carefully placed questions. "Strange how the granary roof still sags," Li Wei remarked to Farmer Wu as they lifted a heavy stone to reinforce the ditch wall. "Magistrate Zhang promised to repair it after last harvest, didn't he?" Farmer Wu grunted. "Promises are like morning dew, gone by midday when it comes to officials." Later, while sharing a water skin with Hong, Li Wei said, "My cousin from Willow Creek Village says their magistrate reduced taxes after the poor harvest. Said it was his duty to ensure people didn't starve. Different kind of official, I suppose." Hong snorted. "Our magistrate would tax the air if he could put it in a sack." Li Wei was careful. He never said anything that could be directly reported as sedition. He merely stated facts: the unrepaired granary, the excessive taxes, the neglected irrigation system that had once worked better. He asked questions that invited comparison to how things should be versus how they were. Each comment was a seed planted in fertile soil. He watched as villagers repeated his observations to others, as the murmurs about Magistrate Zhang's competence grew from isolated complaints to shared grievances. That evening, as Li Wei returned to his hut, the system flickered. Action, undermining local authority. Magistrate Zhang's authority reduced by 2. Current authority, 68 out of 100. Quest progress, 2 out of 10. Note, indirect action through rumor and implication yields smaller gains but carries lower risk of detection. A wave of fatigue washed over Li Wei, not physical exhaustion, but a mental weariness that felt like he'd been concentrating on fine embroidery for hours. The system noted this too. Status, mental fatigue, mild. Effect, minus 10% to concentration. Will recover with rest, ***. So there were costs. Direct actions might yield greater rewards, but they also required more energy, more risk. The balance would be something to learn. Inside his modest hut, Li Wei prepared a simple meal of millet porridge. As he ate, he reviewed his growing statistics through the mandate grinder interface. Name, Li Wei. Strength, 6/100, base, 5. Village influence, 1 out of 100. Mandate points, 5. Skills, basic farming technique, advanced, basic stealth technique. Active quests, reduce Magistrate Zhang's authority by 10 points, progress, 2 out of 10. The numbers were small, but they were his. For the first time in his life, Li Wei wasn't entirely at the mercy of the harvest, the weather, or the magistrate's whims. He had tools. He had knowledge. He had a path forward. As night deepened and the village settled into silence, Li Wei lay on his sleeping mat, staring at the thatched roof above. The interface hovered at the edge of his vision, a constant reminder of the glitch that had changed everything. He practiced calling it up and dismissing it, learning its rhythms and limitations. Then, just as he was about to drift into sleep, something changed. At the far edge of his awareness, where the interface displayed system notifications, a pulse of crimson light flashed once, twice, 3 times. It wasn't a message directed at him, it was something passing through the system itself, like a ripple in a pond. Golden text appeared, stark against the darkness of his hut. Regional system scan detected. Source, Imperial Censorate. Distance, medium. Status, passive monitoring. Advice, maintain low profile. System activity increases detection risk, ***. Li Wei sat up abruptly, his heart pounding. The notification hung in the air for several seconds before fading, leaving only the standard interface elements. But the message was clear. They were looking. Somewhere in the regional capital or perhaps even the imperial city itself, agents of the Censorate had activated something that swept through the system, checking for anomalies. For glitches. For peasants who shouldn't be able to see the hidden pillars of imperial power. Li Wei remained still, listening to the night sounds, the chirping of crickets, the distant bark of a dog, the whisper of wind through his barley field. Everything seemed normal. The village slept, unaware that metaphysical currents had just brushed against their settlement. But Li Wei knew. The game had just become more dangerous. Every point of authority he siphoned, every rumor he spread, every subtle undermining of Magistrate Zhang's power, it all left traces. Ripples in a system that wasn't supposed to have ripples. He lay back down, but sleep didn't come. His mind raced with calculations and precautions. How often did these scans occur? How close had it been? What exactly could the Censorate detect? The mandate grinder interface glowed softly in his vision, a paradox of opportunity and threat. It was the key to everything he'd never dared dream of: power, respect, perhaps even freedom from the oppressive weight of the De Yen Empire. But it was also a beacon that could bring the entire imperial apparatus down upon him. Outside, the moon rose over the village, casting silver light on the neglected granary, the newly cleared irrigation ditch, the fields that were beginning to show the first green shoots of what promised to be Li Wei's best harvest ever. The ordinary world continued, unaware of the silent war beginning in its midst. Li Wei closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to plan. The scan had been passive. Distant. He still had time. He still had opportunities. But he would need to be smarter. More careful. More patient. The grind would continue. But henceforth, every move would be measured against this new reality. Somewhere out there, in the darkness beyond the village, watchers were looking for people like him. The morning sun cast long shadows across Li Wei's field, where the wheat stood taller and greener than any in the village. He ran his calloused hands through the stalks, feeling the weight of the grains that had grown plump under his new farming knowledge. The mandate grinder interface flickered at the edge of his vision, showing his current stats: strength, 2, mandate points, 5, village influence, 1. He'd spent the past week harvesting, bundling the crop into rough sacks that now sat by his hut, ready for market. Old Man Chen hobbled over, leaning on his walking stick. "Your field looks like imperial tribute grain, boy." Never seen wheat like this in our poor soil. Li Wei kept his expression humble. Just good fortune and hard work, elder. Fortune indeed, Chen muttered, eyeing the sacks. Magistrate Zhang's men will notice if you bring this to the village market. Better take it to Linen Town. The prices are better there, and the magistrate's eyes are fewer. Li Wei nodded, the advice aligning with his own thoughts. The journey to Linen Town was half a day's walk along the dusty road that wound through terraced hillsides. He loaded 2 sacks onto a makeshift wooden sled he'd fashioned from fallen branches, tying them with coarse hemp rope. The weight strained his muscles, but the extra strength from his first mandate siphon made the burden manageable. As he pulled the sled onto the road, Widow Feng called from her doorway, her infant daughter cradled against her chest. Be careful, Li Wei. The road to Linen passes Lord Gao's estate. They say he's been doubling tolls for peasants. Li Wei gave a respectful bow. I'll keep my head down, auntie. The journey was a study in the empire's neglect. Irrigation canals that should have been maintained were choked with weeds, their stone linings cracked. Peasant huts dotted the landscape, their thatched roofs sagging under the weight of poverty. Twice, Li Wei passed imperial couriers on horseback, their polished armor gleaming in the sun as they rode without glancing at the peasant dragging his sled through the dust. When Linen Town's walls appeared in the distance, Li Wei felt the first prickle of the mandate grinder activating. The interface shimmered, displaying new information as he approached the town gates. Location, Linen Town Market. Imperial Prestige, 25 out of 100. Local Authority Concentration, medium. He paid the gate toll to a bored-looking guard, who barely glanced at his crops. The market square was a cacophony of smells and sounds, spices, roasting meat, the sharp tang of dye vats, and the constant chatter of merchants hawking wares. Li Wei found a spot near a pottery stall and laid out his wheat sacks, their quality immediately drawing attention. Where'd you get grain like this? Asked a plump merchant in silk robes, fingering the kernels. My own field, sir, Li Wei said, keeping his eyes lowered in the proper peasant deference. The merchant bought both sacks for 3 silver coins, triple what Li Wei would have gotten in the village. As he pocketed the coins, his eyes scanned the crowd. The mandate grinder flickered again, highlighting figures with stat displays that floated above their heads like ghostly inscriptions. Most townsfolk showed minimal stats, influence, 1 to 3, wealth, 5 to 10, but then he saw him. Lord Gao entered the square with 4 retainers, his robes of deep blue silk embroidered with silver thread. Above his head, the stats glowed brightly. Lord Gao. Authority, 65/100. Prestige, 30 out of 100. Legitimacy, 15 out of 100. Wealth, 85 out of 100. Li Wei's breath caught. The noble's authority was higher than Magistrate Zhang's, but his legitimacy was shockingly low. Rumors of cruelty, the villagers had said. As Gao moved through the market, merchants bowed deeply, but their eyes held resentment. Li Wei watched as the noble stopped at a textile stall, demanding the finest bolt of silk for half its marked price. The merchant protested weakly, but Gao's retainer shoved him aside, taking the silk without further payment. Another day's profit gone to that leech, muttered the pottery seller next to Li Wei. Does he always take what he wants? Li Wei asked, keeping his voice casual. The potter spat on the ground. Since his father died last winter. The old lord was strict but fair. This one. He's doubled the road tolls, seized 2 farms for tax arrears, and they say he had a servant beaten to death for spilling wine. Li Wei listened as he pretended to examine some clay bowls. Around him, other merchants grumbled in low voices. A spice trader complained about Gao's new market security fee that went directly to the lord's coffers. A butcher whispered about how Gao's men had confiscated his best cuts for a banquet without payment. Then the mandate grinder interface flashed with golden text. New quest, sabotage noble reputation. Objective, reduce Lord Gao's prestige by 15 points. Method, undermine public perception through indirect means. Reward, 2 agility points, basic stealth technique. Warning, direct confrontation may trigger censorate alerts. Li Wei felt his heart quicken. This was bigger than spreading rumors about Magistrate Zhang. Lord Gao was nobility, with connections to the imperial court. But the low legitimacy stat showed the man was vulnerable. The reward, agility and stealth, would help him move unseen, essential for avoiding the censoriate's gaze. He spent the afternoon observing. Gao left the market after an hour, his retainers carrying bundles of purchased goods. Li Wei noted the locations where people gathered to talk, the well near the town's central shrine, the notice board outside the magistrate's office, the tea house where literate townsfolk gathered. That evening, Li Wei rented a corner in a cheap inn, paying with a few copper coins from his silver. In the flickering light of an oil lamp, he took out a piece of rough paper and a charcoal stick he'd purchased. He wasn't educated, peasants didn't learn characters, but the mandate grinder seemed to guide his hand. Simple, biting verses formed. The Lord takes tolls from road and gate. Leaves merchants with an empty plate. His silk robes shine with stolen gold. While peasant stories go untold. And another. Gao's father built with honest hand. His son now ravages the land. What heaven gave, he turns to dust. In greed and cruelty we trust. Li Wei's head throbbed with the effort. Each character he formed drained something from him, not physical strength, but mental focus. The mandate grinder interface showed a new stat, mental fatigue, 20 out of 100. He pushed through, writing 3 more poems before collapsing onto the thin straw mattress, sleep claiming him instantly. For the next 7 days, Li Wei became a ghost in Linen Town. Each morning, he woke before dawn, his mental fatigue having decreased slightly overnight. He'd move through the still dark streets, his footsteps quiet on the packed earth. The first day, he left a poem pinned to the notice board with a rusty nail. The second day, he slipped one between the pages of a ledger at the tea house. The third day, he placed one near the well where women gathered to draw water. He watched from shadows as people discovered them. A young scholar at the tea house read the first poem aloud, his friends laughing bitterly. True words, one said. My father paid Gao's road maintenance fee 3 times this year, and the potholes only grow larger. The women at the well whispered the verses as they worked. My cousin serves in Gao's household, one said quietly. She says he throws feasts while his tenants starve. By the 4th day, the poems were being copied. Li Wei saw a merchant's apprentice transcribing one onto a scrap of paper. By the 5th day, people were adding their own lines. A new verse appeared on the notice board. Gao's taxes fill his chests with coin. While honest laborers toil and moan. The mandate slips from grasping hand. As heaven sees the seeds we've sown. Li Wei felt the mandate grinder responding. Each time someone quoted a poem or added to the gossip, a tiny flicker of energy transferred from Lord Gao to him. The interface showed incremental changes. Lord Gao's prestige, 28/100. 25 out of 100. 22 out of 100. His own mental fatigue climbed steadily, 45 out of 100, 60 out of 100, 75 out of 100. On the 6th day, as he placed a poem near the shrine, a wave of dizziness hit him. He stumbled against a wall, his vision swimming. The system warning flashed, mental fatigue, 85/100. Cognitive functions impaired. Rest required. He forced himself back to the inn, sleeping for 14 hours straight. When he woke, his head still felt thick, like cotton had been stuffed behind his eyes. But the mandate grinder showed progress, Lord Gao's prestige, 18 out of 100. He'd reduced it by 12 points. 3 more to complete the quest. On the 7th day, Li Wei heard the gossip reaching critical mass. At the market, a fishmonger argued with one of Gao's retainers over an inflated fee. Your lord already took his poem-worthy share, the fishmonger shouted, drawing a crowd. The retainer raised a hand to strike, but townspeople stepped forward, their expressions dark. That afternoon, as Li Wei prepared to leave town, the mandate grinder flashed triumphantly. Quest complete, sabotage noble reputation. Lord Gao's prestige reduced from 30 to 15. Reward granted, +2 agility points, basic stealth technique. A surge of energy flowed through Li Wei's limbs, different from the strength he'd gained before. His muscles felt lighter, more responsive. When he moved, his footsteps became naturally quieter, his body instinctively seeking shadows and cover. The basic stealth technique unfolded in his mind, how to control breathing, how to move without rustling clothes, how to use peripheral vision to monitor surroundings. But the cost was severe. His mental fatigue now read, 95/100. Every thought felt sluggish, like wading through mud. The journey home was a blur of pain. He walked mechanically, his enhanced agility making the distance easier but his mind barely registering the passing landscape. The 2 silver coins remaining in his pocket felt like stones. As he crested the final hill before his village, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and purple, something made him pause. His new stealth senses tingled. At the top of the next hill overlooking the village, a figure stood silhouetted against the twilight sky. A man in dark, travel-stained robes, his face hidden by a deep hood. He stood perfectly still, watching the village below. Not a peasant, his posture was too erect, his stillness too complete. As Li Wei watched, the figure turned slightly, and though the distance was great, Li Wei felt certain the hooded face was now looking directly at him. The mandate grinder flickered weakly, too drained to provide analysis. But Li Wei didn't need it. The regional system scan from days ago, the warning about attracting attention, the careful monitoring of anomalies, it all clicked into place with dreadful certainty. The figure stood watching for another minute, then turned and disappeared over the hill's crest, melting into the gathering darkness. Li Wei remained frozen, the last of the day's warmth leaching from the air, replaced by a chill that had nothing to do with the evening breeze. The sky over Li Wei's village had turned into a pale, unforgiving sheet of parchment. For 3 weeks, not a single drop of rain had fallen since the last unseasonable drizzle, and the earth beneath his feet cracked like dried bones. He stood at the edge of his field, watching the once promising shoots of millet wilt under the relentless sun. The air tasted of dust and desperation. Li Wei's mandate grinder interface flickered at the edge of his vision, more insistent than usual. He focused on it, and the display shifted from his personal stats to a regional overview he hadn't seen before. The characters glowed with ominous red. Regional status, Northern Qinghe Prefecture. Imperial legitimacy, 32/100, plummeting. Food security, critical. Local authority response, negligent. The numbers seemed to pulse with each passing hour. Li Wei remembered Magistrate Zhang's last visit. The man had ridden through the village on his fine horse, ignoring the parched fields, demanding the quarterly tax payment be brought forward, due to imperial needs. Old man Chen had fallen to his knees, pleading for a delay until after the harvest, but Zhang had merely sneered and ordered Clerk Xiao to record the refusal as rebellion. Now, as Li Wei watched Widow Feng trying to soothe her crying infant with the last of her rice gruel, he felt the system stir. A new quest window materialized, its golden characters stark against the bleak landscape. Major quest, solve regional crisis. Objective, prevent famine through organized community action. Reward, 5 wisdom points, advanced logistics skill, significant mandate siphon from local authority. Warning, failure will result in mass starvation and permanent regional legitimacy loss. Li Wei's heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't like undermining a noble's reputation or spreading rumors, this was life and death on a scale he'd never confronted. He could feel the weight of the quest settling into his bones, the system's urgency thrumming through him like a second heartbeat. For 2 days, Li Wei moved through the village like a ghost, observing, calculating. He visited every household, noting their remaining stores, the condition of their fields, the number of able-bodied workers. Farmer Wu's plot near the stream still had some moisture, but the water level was dropping daily. Hong showed him the irrigation channels they'd built together, now mostly dry trenches in the earth. At night, Li Wei sat in his humble hut, the mandate grinder projecting complex diagrams only he could see. His advanced farming technique provided knowledge of drought-resistant crops and water conservation methods, but implementing them required coordination he didn't yet possess. He needed to become more than just a clever peasant, he needed to become an organizer. The breakthrough came on the 3rd morning. Li Wei was examining the village granary when his system highlighted something curious. The structure's imperial prestige rating had dropped to 8 out of 100, but when he focused his perception, he detected faint traces of recent activity. The lock showed fresh scratches, and the dust near the foundation had been disturbed. That afternoon, while helping Old Man Chen repair his roof, Li Wei casually mentioned the granary's strange condition. The old man's eyes narrowed. Magistrate Zhang's men came last week, he whispered, leaning close. Loaded 3 carts after dark. Said it was for imperial inspection. But old Lu who guards the town warehouse told me they stored it in Zhang's private cellar. Li Wei felt the quest shift in his mind. This wasn't just about surviving the drought, it was about exposing the corruption that made it deadly. He began his work methodically. First, he called a meeting at the village shrine, using the influence he'd gained from solving the irrigation dispute. 20 families gathered, their faces gaunt with worry. Li Wei didn't speak of systems or quests, he spoke of survival. "We have 3 advantages," he told them, his voice steady despite the dryness in his throat. "First, Farmer Wu's field by the stream still has water. Second, I've learned techniques from my grandfather for growing drought crops. Third, we have each other." He laid out his plan with a clarity that surprised even himself. The system's impending reward of wisdom points seemed to already be enhancing his thinking. They would implement rotational watering, prioritizing the hardiest crops first. They would dig deeper collection pits for what little rain might come. They would pool their remaining seed and plant quick-growing beans between the rows of millet to maximize yield. But the most controversial part came next. "We need to send a delegation to Linen Town," Li Wei said. "To petition for the relief grain that's supposed to be stored in the regional granaries." Widow Feng shook her head. "Magistrate Zhang will refuse. He always does." "Not if the petition comes from scholars," Li Wei replied, a plan crystallizing in his mind. "Traveling scholars who hear of our plight and write to their contacts in the capital." Over the next week, Li Wei became the village's unseen architect. By day, he worked alongside others, implementing the water conservation techniques his system knowledge provided. They built bamboo pipelines from the dwindling stream to multiple fields, creating a shared irrigation network. They planted drought-resistant varieties of sorghum that Li Wei identified using his farming knowledge, crops that could survive on minimal water. By night, he used his newly acquired basic stealth technique to move through the shadows of Linen Town. He didn't write the satirical poems this time, instead, he planted seeds of truth. He left anonymous notes at the inn where traveling scholars stayed, detailing the missing relief grain and Magistrate Zhang's hoarding. He slipped accounts of the village's suffering into the correspondence of a merchant known to have connections with reformist officials. The physical toll was immense. Li Wei's body ached from dawn till dusk, digging irrigation channels, hauling water, helping weaker villagers with their plots. His hands blistered and cracked, and hunger became a constant companion as he shared his own dwindling stores. The system showed his physical exhaustion climbing, 40%, 60%, 85%. But with each percentage point, he could feel his connection to the mandate grinder deepening, as if suffering was the price of wielding it. The turning point came on the 14th day. A group of 3 scholars arrived in the village, their robes dusty from travel. They'd heard rumors of both the drought and corruption. Li Wei, playing the humble farmer, showed them the wilting crops, introduced them to families surviving on 1 meal a day, and, most damningly, guided them to Magistrate Zhang's private storage complex on the edge of town. What they found there made even the most cynical scholar pale: sacks of grain stamped with imperial relief markings, hidden behind false walls in Zhang's warehouse. That night, as Li Wei collapsed onto his sleeping mat, the system notifications began. Quest complete, regional crisis solved. Famine prevented through community organization and corruption exposure. Rewards granted, +5 wisdom points, advanced logistics skill. Mandate siphon activated. He watched as golden streams flowed from the regional status display toward his personal interface. The numbers shifted dramatically. Magistrate Zhang's authority, 48/138/100. Magistrate Zhang's legitimacy, 40/125/100. Regional Imperial Legitimacy, 32/145/100. Li Wei's Mandate Reserve, +22 points. The influx of power was dizzying. Wisdom points integrated into his consciousness, suddenly making complex logistical problems, crop distribution routes, water allocation schedules, labor rotations, solve themselves in his mind. Advanced logistics skill unfolded like a map in his thoughts, showing him how to optimize every resource, every pair of hands. But the cost was equally profound. His physical exhaustion hit 98%, and he could barely lift his arms. Every muscle screamed in protest. He lay in the darkness, listening to the village, no longer quiet with despair, but humming with cautious hope. The scholars had promised to write to the provincial governor. The shared irrigation system was working. The drought-resistant crops were taking root. He had done it. He had ground the empire's legitimacy from the very crisis it created. Just as sleep began to claim him, a shadow moved at his doorway. Li Wei's eyes snapped open, his basic stealth technique making him instinctively still. The cloaked figure from the hill stood there, silhouetted against the moonlight. The man stepped inside without invitation, moving with unnatural quiet. He lowered his hood, revealing sharp features and eyes that seemed to see too much. Li Wei recognized him. This was the Watcher, the presence he'd felt during the system scan. "I am Agent Wang of the Imperial Censorate," the man said, his voice low and devoid of threat, which somehow made it more frightening. He studied Li Wei as if examining a curious specimen. "Your glitch is not unique. Others have manifested similar anomalies." Li Wei tried to sit up, but his exhausted body refused. He could only stare as Agent Wang knelt beside him, close enough that his next words were barely a whisper. "And the Emperor knows." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Agent Wang's expression remained unreadable. "He has known for years. The question is not whether glitches exist, but which ones he allows to continue." He stood, looking down at Li Wei with something that might have been pity. "Rest, farmer. Your famine is over. But your real trial is just beginning." Then he was gone, melting into the night as if he'd never been there at all. Li Wei lay in the darkness, the system's rewards suddenly feeling like chains, the Emperor's awareness a weight pressing down on his chest. The grind had just become infinitely more dangerous. The cloaked figure stood motionless on the hill, moonlight casting long shadows that seemed to swallow the village below. Li Wei's heart hammered against his ribs, each beat echoing the exhaustion that still clung to his bones. He'd just returned from organizing the famine relief, his body aching with the 98% physical exhaustion the system displayed in shimmering red characters at the edge of his vision. "Now this." "Agent Wang," the man said, his voice low and measured. He pulled back his hood to reveal a face that was neither young nor old, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Imperial Censorate. We need to talk." Li Wei's mind raced. The mandate grinder interface flickered briefly, trying to assess the man before him, but returned only fragmented data: Imperial affiliation, Censorate, threat level, moderate, system anomaly detector, active. No stats. The system couldn't read him fully, at first. "Follow me," Wang said, turning without waiting for a reply. His movements were efficient, each step deliberate. Li Wei hesitated, his basic stealth technique whispering caution, but the curiosity burned hotter. He fell into step, keeping a careful distance as they wound through the darkened paths toward Linen Town. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant wood smoke. Crickets chirped in the fields, their rhythm broken only by the occasional hoot of an owl. Li Wei's senses were heightened, every shadow a potential threat, every rustle of leaves a warning. He noted the way Wang moved, fluid, aware, but not aggressive. This wasn't an arrest. Not yet. They reached the outskirts of Linen, where the buildings grew closer together, their wooden frames creaking in the slight breeze. Wang led him to a narrow alley, then through a discreet side entrance into a tea house that should have been closed at this hour. Inside, a single lantern cast a warm, flickering glow over polished wooden tables and a faint scent of jasmine tea. "Sit," Wang said, gesturing to a corner table. He poured 2 cups of tea from a pot that steamed gently. The liquid was pale gold, fragrant. Li Wei watched as Wang took the first sip, a gesture of safety, or perhaps just habit. "The mandate grinder," Wang began, setting his cup down with a soft click. "You call it a system. We call it a celestial anomaly. A crack in the fabric of imperial governance." Li Wei remained silent, his fingers tracing the rim of his cup. The tea was hot, almost scalding. He focused on that sensation, grounding himself. "It affects a handful of individuals across the empire," Wang continued, his eyes never leaving Li Wei's. "Most are peasants, like you. A few minor officials. The Censorate has monitored these glitches for decades. Our mandate is stability, to ensure the dynasty's metaphysical pillars remain intact. So you eliminate us," Li Wei said, his voice quieter than he intended. Wang's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Not always. The Emperor's will is complex. Sometimes, anomalies can be useful. If properly managed. He leaned forward, the lantern light carving deep shadows under his eyes. I'm offering you a deal. Continue your little rebellions, undermine the corrupt, solve crises the court ignores. But avoid targeting the imperial core. No emperors, no princes, no direct challenges to the throne. And share information with me. What you learn, what you see. Li Wei's mind churned. The system interface flickered again, this time attempting to gauge Wang's sincerity. It returned a reading, sincerity, 62/100. Moderate. Not trustworthy, but not entirely false either. In return? Li Wei asked. Minor protection. Warnings when scans are too close. Guidance on avoiding detection. And, Wang paused, the freedom to keep grinding. Within limits. Li Wei sipped his tea, the bitterness lingering on his tongue. He thought of Magistrate Zhang, whose authority he'd already reduced by 10 points through the famine exposure. He thought of the quest still active in his vision, undermine Magistrate Zhang's authority by 10 points, 8 out of 10. 2 more points to go. This deal could make that easier, or trap him. I accept, Li Wei said finally. But I operate independently. I share what I choose, when I choose. Wang studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Agreed. As the words left his mouth, Li Wei's system chimed softly. A new quest appeared in glowing blue text, side quest, gather intel on other grinders. Objective, learn of at least one other mandate grinder user. Reward, 1 perception point. Wang didn't seem to notice the change. He finished his tea and stood. I'll contact you when necessary. For now, lay low. The regional scans will intensify. Li Wei left the tea house first, slipping back into the night. The encounter left him unsettled. He had gained an ally of sorts, but also a leash. For the next several days, he moved carefully. He tended his fields with his advanced farming technique, the crops responding well to his care. He used his basic stealth technique to move through the village unnoticed, listening to conversations in the market, at the well, in the shade of the old banyan tree where Old Man Chen often held court. He asked subtle questions, weaving them into casual talk. Heard there's trouble up north, he'd say to Widow Feng as she balanced her infant daughter on her hip. Some say it's bandits. Others say, stranger things. Widow Feng would shrug, her eyes tired. Stranger than Magistrate Zhang hoarding grain while children starve. Li Wei would nod, letting the conversation drift. He spoke with Farmer Wu about irrigation disputes in other provinces, with Hong about rumors from traveling merchants. He even ventured to the next village over, where he bought a sack of rice from a grizzled farmer named Lao Jin, a new face, not in the Bible, but minor and forgettable. Strange times, Lao Jin muttered as he weighed the rice. Heard from my cousin in Jiang province. Says there's a man there who can predict harvests with uncanny accuracy. Called a sage by some, a witch by others. Li Wei's pulse quickened. Predict how? Dunno. Just knows things. Like he sees the land's spirit. It was thin, but it was something. Over the next week, Li Wei gathered more fragments. A merchant passing through mentioned a minor clerk in a distant prefecture who'd exposed corruption with impossible precision. A traveling monk spoke of a village healer whose remedies worked too well, as if guided by divine insight. None were confirmed, but the pattern was there. Other grinders, scattered, hidden, just like him. His system quest updated, intel gathered, rumors of potential grinders in Jiang province and distant prefectures. Reward, 1 perception point pending confirmation. On the 8th day after meeting Wang, Li Wei was repairing a fence near the village edge when he saw the agent again. Wang approached swiftly, his usual calm replaced by a tight urgency. He carried a small bamboo tube in one hand. We need to talk, Wang said, his voice clipped. They moved to the shade of a willow tree, its branches swaying gently. Wang opened the tube and extracted a tiny scroll, no larger than his thumb. He unrolled it, his face paling as he read. What is it? Li Wei asked, though he already dreaded the answer. Wang looked up, his eyes haunted. The Emperor has issued a new decree. A purge of all system anomalies. Immediate. No exceptions. He crushed the scroll in his fist, the paper crumbling to dust. They're mobilizing the Censorate's elite units. Scanners, hunters. They'll sweep the provinces, starting with the most active regions. Li Wei's breath caught. The system interface flashed a warning, Imperial Purge detected. Threat level, critical. You must lay low, Wang said, his voice dropping to a whisper. No more grinding. No more quests. Disappear into the background. If they find you. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Li Wei looked out over the fields, the village, the distant hills. Everything he'd built, his influence, his skills, his slow, careful rebellion, now hung by a thread. The Emperor's gaze had turned directly upon him, and the grind had just become a hunt. The dust rose in lazy spirals from the dry earth as Li Wei knelt in his field, fingers tracing the stubborn soil. The morning sun beat down with relentless heat, but today the air carried something heavier than humidity, a tension that made the hairs on his neck prickle. His advanced farming technique allowed him to sense the subtle shifts in the land, but this unease came from something beyond soil composition. He heard them before he saw them, the rhythmic clatter of armor, the heavy tread of booted feet on the packed village road. When he looked up, a column of Imperial soldiers marched into the village square, their polished breastplates gleaming like malevolent eyes in the sunlight. There were 12 of them, led by a stern-faced captain whose eyes swept over the gathered villagers with clinical detachment. Li Wei kept his head down, his hands continuing their work as if the soldiers were nothing more than an inconvenient flock of crows. But his mind raced. The mandate grinder interface flickered at the edge of his vision, showing no immediate threats, yet his basic stealth technique seemed to activate instinctively, making his movements appear slower, more deliberate, perfectly ordinary. From his position 30 paces away, he could hear the captain's voice cutting through the morning stillness. By order of His Imperial Majesty, the man announced, his words crisp and devoid of warmth, all subjects are to report any unnatural occurrences, sudden skill improvements or unusual knowledge gained without proper instruction. Old Man Chen shuffled forward, his aged frame trembling slightly. Honorable soldiers, we are simple farmers. What unnatural occurrences could there be in our humble village? The captain's gaze sharpened. An old farmer who speaks with surprising clarity. Tell me, grandfather, have you noticed anyone displaying abilities beyond their station? Anyone who has suddenly become better at things? Li Wei's breath caught in his throat. He remembered old Chen's improved harvest after Li Wei had shared water conservation techniques during the famine crisis. The old man had been one of the quickest learners, his yields increasing by nearly 40%. If the soldiers dug too deep. For 3 days, the soldiers remained, questioning villagers individually in Magistrate Zhang's compound. Li Wei watched from the shadows of his hut each evening as soldiers escorted nervous farmers through the gates. On the 4th morning, he saw 2 soldiers leading old Chen toward the compound, their grips firm on his thin arms. That night, under the cover of darkness, Li Wei activated his stealth technique. The skill felt different now, more refined, as if his increased agility points had woven themselves into the ability's fabric. He moved through the village like a shadow, his footsteps silent on the hard-packed earth. The soldiers had set up a temporary camp at the village's edge, their tents arranged in a precise semicircle around a central fire. Crouching behind a storage shed, Li Wei listened as 2 off-duty soldiers spoke in low tones. Found 3 already in Riverbend town, one was saying, his voice gruff. A blacksmith who suddenly started producing masterwork blades. A seamstress whose embroidery became miraculously detailed overnight. What happened to them? The other asked. A pause. Then, the censorate took them. For evaluation. The way he said the word made Li Wei's blood run cold. They're not just looking for the big anomalies, the first soldier continued. Captain says even small improvements count. Someone who suddenly farms better, heals faster, calculates numbers more accurately. Li Wei slipped away, his mind working furiously. Old Chen would be questioned tomorrow morning. The old man's improved farming was exactly what they were looking for, sudden skill improvement, without explanation. He returned to his hut, the mandate grinder interface pulsing softly in his vision. His accumulated mandate points glowed, 42 authority, 38 prestige, 51 legitimacy. A new quest notification appeared. Quest updated, evade detection. Objective, avoid Imperial detection for 30 days. Reward, 3 luck points. Current status, day January 30th. But old Chen wouldn't last 30 minutes under proper questioning. The old man was honest to a fault. He described exactly how he'd learned the techniques, and from whom. An idea formed, dangerous and costly. Li Wei waited until the deepest hour of night, when even the soldiers' sentries grew sluggish with fatigue. He retrieved a blank ledger from his meager possessions, one he'd acquired months ago when pretending to assist Clerk Zhao with tax records. With careful strokes, he began writing in the archaic script he'd seen in Magistrate Zhang's old documents, describing ancient farming techniques passed down from the Golden Dynasty. The words flowed from some deep part of his mind, his advanced logistics skill helping him structure the false manual with convincing detail. He described crop rotation methods, irrigation designs, soil enrichment techniques, all things he'd actually implemented, but framed as rediscovered ancient knowledge. As he wrote the final character, the mandate grinder flickered violently. A notification burned in his vision. Warning: fabricating evidence to manipulate imperial investigation. Cost: 8 legitimacy points, 5 prestige points. Proceed. Y/N. Li Wei hesitated only a moment. Old Chen had been kind to him when he was truly destitute, sharing what little rice he had during the lean winter. He selected Y. The drain was immediate and visceral. It felt like something vital being pulled from his core, not painful exactly, but deeply unsettling, as if part of his connection to the world had been severed. His legitimacy dropped to 43, his prestige to 33. The ledger in his hand seemed to age before his eyes, the paper yellowing at the edges, the ink fading to a convincing antique brown. Just before dawn, he slipped into old Chen's hut. The old man slept fitfully, murmuring about soldiers and questions. Li Wei placed the ledger beneath a loose floorboard near the hearth, somewhere that might have been a hiding place for generations. When the soldiers came for old Chen that morning, Li Wei watched from his field, his heart pounding against his ribs. They questioned the old man for hours. Then, around midday, a soldier emerged from the hut holding the ledger. The captain examined it, his stern face unreadable. He called for Magistrate Zhang, who arrived looking nervous and sweaty. "This script, it appears genuine," Magistrate Zhang said after examining the ledger, his voice uncertain. "The Golden Dynasty techniques, yes, I've heard legends." The captain's eyes narrowed. "So the old man found this?" "It must have been hidden by his ancestors," Magistrate Zhang said quickly, eager to please. "Many peasant families have such heirlooms they don't understand the value of." Old Chen was released, looking bewildered but unharmed. The soldiers packed their camp that afternoon, moving on to the next village. But as they marched out, the captain paused, his eyes scanning the village one last time. For a moment, his gaze seemed to linger on Li Wei's field before moving on. In the following days, Li Wei became a ghost in his own life. He farmed with deliberate mediocrity, using only the most basic techniques. He avoided conversations about improvements or changes. He watched as rumors spread about the purge, whispers of disappearances in neighboring towns, of whole families taken for questioning and never returning. His grinding slowed to a crawl. Instead of dramatic actions, he began writing anonymous letters, careful, precise missives detailing small corruptions he'd observed. A minor tax collector skimming copper coins. A guardsman accepting bribes to overlook curfew violations. Each letter was written with different handwriting, posted in different towns, targeting officials with low enough stats that their downfall wouldn't attract major attention. The mandate points trickled in slowly, +1 authority here, +2 legitimacy there. It was frustrating work compared to his earlier victories, but necessary. The evade detection quest counter ticked upward, day 7, day 12, day 19. On the evening of day 23, as Li Wei prepared a meager dinner of rice and boiled greens, the mandate grinder interface suddenly flashed crimson. A notification burned across his vision, stark and final. System alert, other grinder eliminated. Location, Province Liang. Status, terminated by Imperial Censorate Purge Unit. Mandate redistribution in progress. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Li Wei felt it, a surge like a sudden gust of wind through his soul. His stats flickered and climbed. Authority, 43-48. Prestige, 33-36. Legitimacy, 43-47. The increase was modest but undeniable. Someone else like him, another anomaly, another grinder, had been found and eliminated. And a fraction of whatever power they'd accumulated had flowed into him, as if the mandate itself was a river seeking new channels when old ones were blocked. Li Wei sat in the growing darkness of his hut, the last of the day's light fading from the small window. The rice cooled, forgotten. Somewhere out there, the purge continued. And now he knew with chilling certainty, when one grinder fell, the others grew stronger. The system wasn't just a tool, it was an ecosystem, and the Imperial Censorate was culling it. He looked at his hands, ordinary peasants' hands stained with soil. They felt different now. Heavier. As if they held not just his own fate, but echoes of someone else's ended story. The oppressive tension that had gripped the village for weeks began to ease like a slowly loosening fist. Imperial soldiers still patrolled the dusty roads, but their interrogations grew less frequent, their questions less pointed. Li Wei watched from the shadow of his modest hut as the morning sun cast long shadows across the parched earth, his mandate grinder interface flickering with subtle updates. The purge was subsiding, but the system's warning remained, a constant, low hum in the back of his mind. 3 days after the soldiers' presence diminished, rumors began to swirl through the village like autumn leaves caught in a breeze. Old Man Chen hobbled over to Li Wei's plot, his weathered face animated with news. "Governor Lu is coming," he whispered, leaning on his walking stick. "They say he'll inspect the famine recovery. Magistrate Zhang has been running around like a headless chicken, ordering the roads swept and the granary repainted." Li Wei nodded, his fingers tracing the rough texture of a farming tool. The interface responded immediately, pulling up Governor Lu's stats in a translucent overlay that only he could see. Governor Lu, Regional Authority. Authority, 78/100. Prestige, 65/100. Legitimacy, 42/100. Corruption, 67/100. A quest notification materialized in golden script. New quest, expose high-level corruption. Objective, reduce Governor Lu's authority by 25 points through indirect means. Reward, 5 charisma points, intermediate persuasion skill, large mandate siphon. Failure, increased scrutiny, potential exposure. Accept. Y/N. Li Wei accepted without hesitation, feeling the familiar thrill of the grind. But this was different from targeting Magistrate Zhang or Lord Gao. Governor Lu operated at a higher level, his corruption was more sophisticated, his protection more robust. Direct action would be suicide, especially with the Censorate's purge still simmering. Over the next 2 days, Li Wei observed the preparations. Magistrate Zhang's clerks worked feverishly, compiling reports and adjusting records. Clerk Zhao, the magistrate's assistant, could be seen carrying stacks of scrolls between the magistrate's office and the newly erected inspection pavilion at the village edge. Li Wei's advanced logistics skill activated almost instinctively, his mind began organizing information, spotting patterns where others saw only paperwork. On the 3rd day, Governor Lu arrived in a procession of polished carriages and mounted guards. He was a man of imposing presence, with a beard trimmed to imperial standards and robes of deep blue silk that shimmered in the sunlight. Magistrate Zhang bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the dust. "Your Excellency, welcome to our humble region. The famine recovery proceeds splendidly, thanks to your wise governance." Li Wei watched from a distance, blending with other villagers who had been ordered to line the road. His interface tracked Governor Lu's stats in real time. The corruption stat pulsed faintly, 67 out of 100. High enough to be vulnerable, but not so blatant as to be obvious. That evening, under cover of darkness, Li Wei put his plan into motion. He couldn't act directly, but he could follow the paper trail. Using his basic stealth technique, he slipped into the magistrate's records office, a small, dusty room adjacent to the main administrative building. The lock was simple, picked with a bent nail and patience. Inside, scrolls were stacked haphazardly, still warm from the day's frantic activity. For hours, Li Wei worked by the faint light of a shielded lantern. His logistics skill transformed what would have been overwhelming data into comprehensible patterns. Tax records from the famine period showed discrepancies, grain shipments that didn't match population counts, silver allocations that vanished between entries. More importantly, he found correspondence between Magistrate Zhang and Governor Lu's office, discussing special assessments and administrative fees that never appeared in public records. The evidence was there, buried beneath layers of bureaucratic obfuscation. Governor Lu wasn't just corrupt, he was systematic, using the famine as cover for embezzlement on a scale Li Wei hadn't imagined. But exposing it required finesse. Direct accusations would be dismissed, and Li Wei would be branded a troublemaker. He needed intermediaries. Over the next week, Li Wei worked in careful stages. First, he compiled the clearest discrepancies into anonymous letters, written in a hand that mimicked the educated clerk's. He left these in places where traveling scholars might find them, the village's lone tea house, near the roadside shrine where intellectuals sometimes paused to rest. Second, he reached out to Agent Wang. Their meeting was brief, conducted in the same secluded tea house where they'd first negotiated. Wang arrived looking tense, his usual composure frayed at the edges. "The purge continues at higher levels," he said without preamble. 3 more grinders eliminated in the western provinces. Li Wei slid a sealed packet across the table. Information on Governor Liu. Corruption evidence. Wang's eyes narrowed. "Why give this to me?" "Because you have channels I don't," Li Wei said simply. "And because if Governor Liu falls, it weakens the empire's structure without threatening the core. Our deal stands." Wang examined the packet but didn't open it. His sincerity rating in Li Wei's interface flickered, 62 out of 100, unchanged. "This is dangerous. Governor Liu has connections in the capital." "All the more reason," Li Wei replied. Wang eventually took the packet, and over the following days, Li Wei watched as the scandal began to unfold. It started subtly, a scholar asking pointed questions during Governor Liu's public audience. Then a minor official from a neighboring district filed a formal inquiry about tax discrepancies. The interface showed Governor Liu's authority beginning to dip, 78. 76, 74. Li Wei continued his anonymous campaign, planting seeds of doubt wherever he could. He used his growing understanding of persuasion, honed through the quest's gradual rewards. When Widow Feng expressed fear about new, administrative fees, Li Wei didn't tell her they were fraudulent. Instead, he asked questions. "Have you seen the official notice? Does it bear the proper seals? I heard in the next village they're challenging such fees." His words spread through the community, not as accusations but as questions. Farmer Wu began comparing notes with Hong about irrigation taxes. Old Man Chen remembered hearing about similar fees being overturned in his youth. The discontent grew organically, fueled by Li Wei's careful nudges rather than direct confrontation. By the end of the second week, the scandal had gained momentum. 3 scholars from the Provincial Academy published a joint letter questioning the famine relief allocations. A minor clerk in Governor Liu's own administration, perhaps sensing which way the wind was blowing, leaked additional records to the censorate. Li Wei's interface showed the progress. Governor Liu's authority, 62/100, -16. Corruption, 6771/100, increased scrutiny. But the mental strain was taking its toll. Li Wei woke each morning with headaches that pulsed behind his eyes. Maintaining the delicate balance of anonymous influence while evading detection required constant vigilance. His sleep grew fitful, interrupted by dreams of scrolls with numbers that shifted and changed. The evade detection quest counter ticked upward, day 18/30, but each day felt longer than the last. The breakthrough came when Governor Liu, facing mounting pressure, announced administrative reforms during a public address in the village square. He stood on the same inspection pavilion where he'd been welcomed weeks before, but now his posture was defensive, his voice strained. "In light of recent misunderstandings, certain fees will be re-evaluated. The Empire's benevolence remains unwavering." As he spoke, Li Wei's interface flashed. Quest update, expose high-level corruption. Governor Liu's authority reduced by 22 points. Additional pressure required for final 3 points. Li Wei watched from the crowd, his face carefully neutral. He needed one final push. That evening, he composed his most dangerous letter yet, a detailed comparison of tax records before and after the famine, showing not just discrepancies but a clear pattern of embezzlement. He didn't sign it, but he wrote with a precision that suggested insider knowledge. He delivered it not to scholars or even Agent Wang, but to the village's newly arrived imperial courier, a young man with honest eyes who handled official correspondence. The letter was addressed to the regional inspector, an official known for integrity who operated outside Governor Liu's direct control. Li Wei watched as the courier placed it with other dispatches, his heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. 3 days later, the response came. Not through official channels, but through the sudden tension that gripped Governor Liu's entourage. The governor cancelled his remaining inspections and prepared to depart early. His interface stats plummeted. Governor Liu's authority, 53/100, -25. Quest complete. Reward, 5 charisma points, intermediate persuasion skill, mandate siphon activated. Li Wei felt the change immediately. His thoughts grew sharper, his words more measured. When he spoke to Old Man Chen about the weather, the old man listened more intently. When he suggested a better way to organize the shared irrigation system, Farmer Wu nodded without argument. The persuasion skill settled into his mind like a new sense, an understanding of how to frame arguments, how to read what people wanted to hear. The mandate siphon was more profound. As Governor Liu's carriage departed in a cloud of dust, Li Wei felt energy flowing into him, not just the statistical increases in his own authority, prestige, and legitimacy, but something deeper. A connection to the very structure he was undermining. His interface updated. Li Wei's stats. Authority, 4858/100. Prestige, 3644/100. Legitimacy, 4752/100. New skill, intermediate persuasion, active. But the victory was bittersweet. That evening, as Li Wei prepared a simple meal in his hut, he noticed unfamiliar faces in the village, men who didn't move like farmers or merchants, who watched everything with calculating eyes. Censorate observers, perhaps. Or Governor Liu's agents. Then, just before midnight, a system alert flashed crimson across his vision. Warning, name flagged on Imperial watch list. Priority, low to moderate. Reason, possible seditious influence in recent corruption exposure. Recommendation, increase evasion protocols. Li Wei's blood ran cold. He wasn't just grinding stats anymore, he was leaving traces. Footprints in the digital snow of the Empire's monitoring systems. The chapter's true climax came 2 days later, when a royal messenger arrived not for Magistrate Zhang, but for the entire village. He read the proclamation in the square, his voice echoing off the surrounding huts. By order of His Excellency Governor Liu, in response to destabilizing elements seeking to undermine imperial harmony, a special investigation into seditious activities is hereby authorized. All persons of interest are to be monitored. All unauthorized gatherings are prohibited. The Empire's justice will root out corruption in all its forms, including those who falsely accuse their betters. The messenger then unrolled a second scroll, smaller but no less ominous. The following individuals are to be observed for loyalty assessment. He read names. Local scholars who had asked questions. Minor clerks who had handled records. And near the end, almost as an afterthought. Li Wei, peasant farmer, recently noted for unusual community influence and knowledge beyond his station. As the words hung in the air, Li Wei stood perfectly still among the villagers. His interface showed no immediate stat changes, but the threat was now quantified, visible. Governor Liu, enraged by his losses, was striking back, not with direct accusation, but with the slow, grinding pressure of imperial scrutiny. The watch list wasn't a death sentence, but it was a leash. A way to track him, to limit his movements, to make every future action riskier. That night, Li Wei lay awake in the darkness, his mind racing. The governor's gambit had succeeded in weakening a high-level target, but it had also drawn a line in the sand. He was no longer just a peasant with a glitch. He was a name on a list. A person of interest. And somewhere in the imperial capital, systems were now tracking him, waiting for him to make a mistake, to reveal the true nature of his grinding. The long road to challenging the emperor had just grown much, much narrower. The mountain air bit through Li Wei's thin cotton jacket as he scrambled up the rocky path, his breath forming ragged clouds in the pre-dawn chill. Behind him, the faint glow of torchlight flickered through the trees, imperial soldiers combing the foothills for the person of interest, whose name now sat on some bureaucrat's watch list. He'd seen the notice nailed to the village gate 2 days prior, a crude charcoal sketch that bore only passing resemblance to his features, but the description of unusual community influence had been specific enough to send him fleeing into the wilderness. He reached the abandoned temple as the first gray light of morning touched the peaks. The structure clung to the mountainside like a forgotten prayer, its wooden beams sagging under centuries of neglect. Moss carpeted the stone steps, and the once bright red lacquer of the pillars had faded to the color of dried blood. Li Wei slipped through the broken doorway, his basic stealth technique keeping his movements silent as he surveyed the single chamber. A cracked statue of some forgotten mountain deity stared blankly from its altar, one stone hand raised in a blessing that no one had sought in decades. For 3 days, he lived like a ghost. He drank from a spring that trickled down the rock face behind the temple, ate wild berries and the last of the millet cakes he'd brought from the village, and slept curled in a corner where the roof still offered shelter from the occasional mountain rain. The solitude gave him time to think, to truly think, without the constant pressure of villagers needing help or officials demanding taxes. His interface flickered to life whenever he willed it, the translucent blue screen hovering before his eyes. The stats glowed with steady light: Authority 58, Prestige 44, Legitimacy 52. Not enough to challenge even a minor magistrate directly, but more than any peasant had ever dreamed of possessing. He practiced his intermediate persuasion skill by rehearsing arguments to the empty air, testing different phrasings and tones until his voice grew hoarse. He visualized logistics problems: how to move grain from storehouse A to village B with minimal notice, how to track tax records across multiple ledgers, and felt his mind growing sharper with each mental exercise. On the 4th evening, as he was setting a simple snare for rabbits near the temple, a shadow detached itself from the trees. Li Wei froze, his hand tightening on the length of cord he held. But the figure raised empty hands, and moonlight caught the familiar severe features of Agent Wang. "You're harder to find than a needle in a rice paddy," Wang said quietly, his voice carrying just far enough to be heard over the wind in the pines. "The soldiers gave up their search yesterday. Governor Lu recalled them to deal with the fallout from your revelations." Li Wei kept his distance, his system already analyzing. Wang's stats appeared: Authority 112, Prestige 89, Legitimacy 76. But more importantly, the sincerity metric Wang had shown him weeks before still read 62 to 100, unchanged, neither more nor less trustworthy than before. "Why are you here?" Li Wei asked, his voice carefully neutral. Wang approached slowly, his black censorate robes making him seem like a piece of the night-given form. "To offer you something better than hiding in ruins." He reached the temple steps and sat, gesturing for Li Wei to join him. After a moment's hesitation, Li Wei did, keeping a careful 3 paces between them. "The empire is rotting from within," Wang began, his eyes fixed on the valley below where lantern lights marked distant villages. "You've seen it: corrupt magistrates, embezzling governors, nobles who care more for their silks than their people. What you haven't seen are the ones trying to stop it." He produced a small scroll from his sleeve, unrolling it to reveal a network diagram drawn in fine ink. Names connected by lines, some annotated with tiny characters. Low-level officials in 3 provinces. Scholars who've been passed over for promotion because they refused bribes. Even a few minor military officers disgusted by the graft in supply chains. They communicate in codes, pass information through poetry clubs and tea houses, and they're looking for leverage. Li Wei studied the diagram. His advanced logistics skill helped him trace the connections, who reported to whom, where information bottlenecks existed. "What do they want from me?" "What you're already doing," Wang said. "But coordinated. Targeted. You have a unique ability to find weaknesses in the system. They have resources, access to records, safe houses, messengers who won't ask questions. Help them undermine specific targets, and they'll provide cover for your activities. Protection, of a sort." Li Wei's mind raced. An alliance meant shared risk, but also shared reward. He could operate more boldly with backing. But it also meant obligations, dependencies. He activated his persuasion skill, choosing his words with deliberate care. "What guarantees?" he asked. "If I help your network, what stops them from betraying me to the censorate when I become inconvenient?" Wang's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. "Practical. Good. First, because they need you more than you need them. Second, because I'll vouch for you, within limits. Third." He tapped the scroll. "The network operates on mutual destruction. Everyone has dirt on everyone else. It's the only way to maintain trust in an empire where trust is currency." They negotiated through the night. Li Wei bargained for access to provincial tax records, for warning before any censorate sweeps, for a cut of any monetary resources recovered from corrupt targets. Wang conceded some points, held firm on others. When dawn began to lighten the sky, they had an agreement: Li Wei would work with the network on specific operations, receiving support in return. But he maintained his independence, no oaths of loyalty, no blind obedience. As Wang prepared to leave, Li Wei's interface flickered. A new quest appeared in glowing characters. Build covert network. Increase network influence by 50 points. Reward, 10 intelligence points, advanced strategy skill. Current influence, 12/50. The number had ticked up from 0 the moment Wang showed him the scroll. Just knowing the network existed gave him some measure of its power. Over the next 2 weeks, Li Wei began his first operation. Bandits had been preying on trade caravans along the mountain road connecting his region to the next province, a minor nuisance to the empire, but a crippling blow to local merchants. The magistrate had done nothing, bandit bribes likely filled his pockets. Using information provided by the network, maps of the bandits' suspected hideouts, schedules of caravan movements, Li Wei planned. He didn't have soldiers or weapons, but he had cunning and knowledge of the terrain. He spent days scouting, memorizing where the path narrowed between cliffs, where loose shale could be triggered, where a carefully placed log could create a bottleneck. He set traps not to kill, but to demoralize. A rockslide triggered by a tripwire that buried the bandits' loot cache. A false trail leading to a hornet's nest. Poisoned water skins left where they'd be found and drunk, causing days of vomiting but no permanent harm. Each act was small, anonymous, untraceable. After the third incident, the bandits began arguing among themselves. Superstition took root, the mountain was cursed, the gods angry. When a merchant caravan passed through unharmed the following week, rumors spread that the bandits had fled. The network's messengers carried the story to nearby towns. The roads were safe again, thanks to unknown forces watching over the people. Li Wei's interface showed the progress. Network influence, 27/50. Each successful operation, each rumor spread, each minor victory against corruption added points. He also gained small amounts of mandate, a point of authority here, 2 of prestige there, as the bandit problem's resolution subtly undermined the magistrate's claim to maintain order. On the 18th day of his mountain exile, with the evade detection quest showing day 2430, Li Wei was scouting a new section of the forest for possible future operations. The autumn leaves had begun to turn, painting the slopes in gold and crimson. He moved quietly, his stealth technique making him nearly invisible among the trees. That's when he saw the man. He was kneeling by a stream, washing what looked like official documents in the water, the ink running in dark streaks as he scrubbed at the paper with desperate intensity. He wore the robes of a minor functionary, but they were stained and torn. His face was pale, his eyes hollow with fear. Li Wei almost slipped away unseen. But as he turned to go, his interface flickered violently. A notification appeared, pulsing with urgent light. System anomaly detected, 50 meters. Another mandate grinder identified. The man looked up as if he'd heard something, his eyes scanning the trees. He saw Li Wei, froze, then slowly raised his hands in the same gesture of peace Wang had used weeks before. "You see it too, don't you?" the man whispered, his voice trembling. "The numbers. The stats." Li Wei remained still, assessing. The man's stats appeared above his head: authority 31, prestige 22, legitimacy 15. Weaker than Li Wei had been after his first few operations. But there was desperation in those numbers, and desperation made people dangerous. "My name is Zhao," the man said, rising slowly. "I was a clerk in Magistrate Zhang's office. Until I saw things I shouldn't have. Until the numbers started appearing." Magistrate Zhang. Li Wei's first target, the corrupt official whose downfall had given him his first real taste of power. The man who still ruled the region, though with diminished authority since Li Wei's earlier operations. "They're looking for me," Zhao continued, his eyes darting to the forest around them. "The censorate. I've been hiding for weeks. But I have information, records I saved before they could be destroyed. Proof of Zhang's dealings with the bandits you just scattered. Proof he ordered the murder of a witness." He took a step forward, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "I can't do it alone. But together, we could take him down completely. Drain every last point of his authority. A joint operation. Risky, but the reward. He trailed off, his eyes gleaming with something between hope and madness. What do you say? Below them, in the valley, the bells of Magistrate Zhang's compound began to ring, calling officials to some meeting or ceremony. The sound carried on the mountain wind, a reminder of the power still waiting to be ground to dust. The mountain temple's crumbling walls offered little warmth against the autumn chill. Li Wei huddled in the shadow of a moss-covered Buddha statue, his breath forming faint clouds in the dim light filtering through broken roof tiles. 3 days had passed since Zhao's proposal, and tonight they would meet again to finalize their plan. Li Wei's interface flickered before his eyes, the familiar blue text glowing softly. Mandate Grinder Interface. Authority, 58. Prestige, 44. Legitimacy, 52. Network Influence, 27/50. Evade Detection, Day 27/30. He ran a calloused hand over his face, feeling the strain in his muscles. The mountain air was thin here, making every breath feel earned. Below in the valley, Magistrate Zhang's compound glowed with lantern light, a beacon of corruption that had bled the region dry for years. Footsteps crunched on gravel outside. Li Wei tensed, his basic stealth technique activating automatically as he melted deeper into the shadows. The door creaked open, and Zhao slipped inside, his silhouette lean and nervous. "You're here," Zhao whispered, his voice tight with anxiety. He carried a leather satchel that bulged with scrolls and papers. "I've brought what we need." Li Wei emerged from the shadows, studying the former clerk. Zhao's eyes darted constantly, checking every corner of the temple. His hands trembled slightly as he set the satchel down on a broken altar stone. "Show me," Li Wei said, keeping his voice low. Zhao unrolled a scroll, revealing intricate calligraphy that mimicked imperial edicts. "My system focuses on prestige theft through forgeries," he explained, his fingers tracing the elegant characters. "I can replicate any document, any seal. The system gives me insights into brush strokes, ink composition, paper aging." Li Wei examined the forgery. Even with his advanced strategy skill, he couldn't detect flaws. The paper smelled faintly of aged mulberry bark, the ink had the proper sheen of high-quality soot mixed with pine resin. "Impressive," he admitted. "And wasteful," Zhao said bitterly. "Every forgery costs me legitimacy points. The system demands balance, the more convincing the lie, the more it chips away at my own standing." They sat on the cold stone floor, Zhao spreading out more documents. "Magistrate Zhang is vulnerable," he began, pointing to a ledger. "His famine relief fund embezzlement, you've seen the discrepancies in the tax records. But that's just the surface." Zhao produced another scroll, this one showing correspondence between Zhang and a merchant consortium in the capital. "He's been skimming construction funds for the new granaries. Using substandard materials, pocketing the difference. When the next famine hits, and it will, with these harvests, those granaries will collapse." Li Wei's mind raced, his advanced logistics skill processing the information. "How much?" "Enough to feed 5 villages for a year," Zhao said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "And that's just the granaries. There's the irrigation project funds, the road maintenance silver, the military supply contracts." A new quest notification appeared in Li Wei's vision. New quest, orchestrate magistrate's downfall. Reduce Magistrate Zhang's authority, prestige, and legitimacy to 0. Reward, massive mandate siphon, 8 strength points, unlock, mandate absorption, skill. Li Wei felt a cold thrill run through him. This was bigger than anything he'd attempted before. "Your plan?" Zhao leaned closer, his breath visible in the cold air. "Multi-pronged attack. You handle the hard evidence, the embezzlement records, the material quality reports, the witness testimonies. Use your network to get them to the right people, the regional inspector, the censorate agents who aren't in Zhang's pocket, the traveling scholars who still believe in justice." He unrolled another document, this one bearing what appeared to be Magistrate Zhang's personal seal. "I'll handle the psychological warfare. Forged letters showing Zhang criticizing the emperor's policies. Faked reports suggesting he's been in contact with rebel elements. Rumors planted in tea-houses and brothels, places where gossip spreads like wildfire." Li Wei considered the plan, his advanced strategy skill analyzing risks and probabilities. "Timeline?" 1 month, Zhao said. "We need to coordinate perfectly. First week, you leak the embezzlement evidence through anonymous channels. Second week, I begin the rumor campaign. Third week, we escalate, forged documents appear in official channels. Fourth week, the final push, simultaneous attacks from all angles. Resources? Li Wei asked, thinking of his dwindling supplies. Zhao grimaced. It will drain us both. My forgeries cost legitimacy. Your evidence gathering will require bribes, travel, risks. But if we coordinate, we can minimize costs. Share information, cover each other's movements. They spent the next 2 hours refining the plan. Li Wei would use his network contacts, Agent Wang's covert operatives, the scholars he'd helped during the famine crisis, even sympathetic villagers like Old Man Chen who could spread rumors without raising suspicion. Zhao detailed his artistic forgeries, letters that would appear to be from Zhang complaining about imperial taxes, poems subtly mocking the emperor's policies, even a fake diary entry suggesting Zhang had ambitions for higher office. The key, Zhao said, his eyes gleaming in the dim light, is escalation. We don't hit him all at once. We let the pressure build. First the embezzlement rumors. Then the forged letters. Then the discovered documents. By the fourth week, even his allies will be looking for ways to distance themselves. Li Wei nodded, his mind already working through logistics. He would need to travel to 3 different counties to gather evidence from construction sites, interview workers who'd been paid with counterfeit silver, document the substandard materials. All while maintaining his evade detection quest and building his network influence. They parted as dawn approached, agreeing to meet weekly at different locations to coordinate progress. The first week passed in a blur of covert activity. Li Wei traveled under cover of darkness, using his basic stealth technique to move between villages. He visited the half-built granaries outside Maple Creek Village, where he found rotting timber instead of seasoned oak. With his advanced farming technique, he could assess the quality of the grain storage design. It was fundamentally flawed, designed to fail. He documented everything, making careful sketches and notes. At one site, he found a foreman willing to talk after Li Wei used his intermediate persuasion skill and a promise of protection through the network. The man showed him ledgers documenting the material substitutions, his hands shaking as he revealed how Magistrate Zhang's men had threatened his family. Li Wei's interface tracked his progress. Network influence, 34/50. Evade detection, day 30/30, quest complete. Reward, 3 luck points. The luck points felt like a tangible warmth in his chest, a slight shift in probability that made guards look the other way, dogs fail to bark, and coincidences work in his favor. He met Zhao at an abandoned mill during the second week. Zhao looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes. The forgeries are taking their toll, he confessed, showing Li Wei a beautifully crafted letter that appeared to be from Magistrate Zhang to a known dissident scholar. I've lost 12 legitimacy points already. But look, the rumors are spreading. 3 tea houses in the county seat are buzzing with talk of Zhang's corruption. Li Wei shared his evidence, sworn testimonies from 2 foremen, samples of substandard building materials, copies of altered ledgers. The regional inspector's office has received anonymous packages, he reported. Agent Wang confirms they're being taken seriously. They coordinated their next moves. Zhao would plant the forged diary in the magistrate's own compound, a risky move that required precise timing. Li Wei would arrange for discovery of embezzled silver in a false floor of Zhang's tax collection office. The third week brought visible results. Magistrate Zhang's public appearances grew rare. When he did emerge, he looked harried, his normally impeccable robes slightly disheveled. Li Wei watched from a crowd as Zhang tried to give a speech about imperial loyalty, his voice cracked, his eyes darted nervously. Li Wei's interface showed the impact. Target, Magistrate Zhang. Authority, 42/100, previously 68. Prestige, 18 out of 100, previously 45. Legitimacy, 23/100, previously 52. They were draining him, slowly but surely. But the effort was taking its toll on both grinders. Li Wei's resources dwindled, the silver he'd saved from his farming, the favors he'd accumulated, even his physical energy. He slept in stolen moments, ate cold rice from a traveler's pack, pushed his body to its limits. Zhao grew increasingly erratic. At their third meeting, in a cave above a waterfall, he paced constantly, his fingers twitching. The system, it's changing me, he muttered. Every forgery, every lie. I can feel pieces of myself slipping away. Li Wei studied him carefully. We can adjust the plan. Slow down. No. Zhao's voice was sharp. We're too close. One more push. The fourth week. We finish this. The final week arrived with autumn rains that turned roads to mud. Li Wei executed the last phase of their plan. He arranged for a concerned citizen to discover the embezzled silver in Magistrate Zhang's office. The timing was perfect, just as imperial auditors arrived from the capital to investigate the growing rumors. Zhao's masterstroke came 3 days later, a forged letter from Magistrate Zhang to a regional warlord, suggesting a plot to overthrow the local garrison. The document was so convincing that even Li Wei, knowing it was fake, felt a chill reading it. The effect was immediate. Magistrate Zhang's remaining authority evaporated like morning dew. His own guards began avoiding him. Merchants closed their doors when he approached. The interface showed his stats plummeting. Authority, 11/100. Prestige, 3 out of 100. Legitimacy, 7 out of 100. On the eve of what should have been Zhang's arrest, Li Wei and Zhao met for the final time at the mountain temple. Rain lashed the broken roof, dripping through gaps to form puddles on the stone floor. Tomorrow, Zhao said, his voice strangely calm. Tomorrow they arrest him. Tomorrow we claim our reward. Li Wei nodded, exhaustion weighing on him like a physical burden. He'd pushed his advanced strategy skill to its limits, coordinated dozens of moving parts, managed risks and contingencies. The network influence quest had completed during the final push, 50-50, rewarding him with 10 intelligence points and unlocking advanced strategy skill. His mind felt sharper, more capable of seeing patterns and connections. We should rest, Li Wei said, leaning against the cold wall. Tomorrow will be. He never finished the sentence. Zhao moved with sudden, shocking speed. Not toward the door, but toward Li Wei. In his hand gleamed a dagger that hadn't been there moments before. I'm sorry, Zhao whispered, but his eyes held no regret. Only hunger. But the system showed me, if I deliver the final blow alone, if I absorb all the mandate when his stats hit 0. I get double. Everything he has, plus everything you've accumulated through our partnership. Li Wei's basic stealth technique activated instinctively, but he was tired, slow. The dagger grazed his arm, drawing blood. He stumbled back, his mind racing even as his body protested. You planned this from the beginning, Li Wei realized, his advanced strategy skill connecting the dots, Zhao's insistence on handling the most damning forgeries, his knowledge of exactly when the arrest would happen, his careful positioning throughout the month. The system rewards ambition, Zhao said, advancing slowly. And you, Li Wei, you're too cautious. Too moral. You actually care about the villagers, about justice. That's weakness. Rain poured through the roof, mixing with the blood on Li Wei's arm. The temple felt suddenly smaller, the shadows deeper. Somewhere in the valley below, Magistrate Zhang's final hours were ticking away, and Zhao intended to claim not just that victory, but Li Wei's as well. The betrayal hung in the air between them, cold and sharp as the dagger in Zhao's hand. The abandoned mill stood silent under the pale moonlight, its broken water wheel casting jagged shadows across the moss-covered stones. Li Wei waited by the eastern entrance as agreed, the chill night air biting through his worn cotton jacket. He could feel the tension in his muscles, a month of careful planning culminating in this final meeting before Magistrate Zhang's inevitable arrest tomorrow. Zhao arrived 5 minutes late, his footsteps unnaturally quiet on the damp earth. The disgraced clerk looked more gaunt than when they'd first met, dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and constant strain. But there was something else in his posture now, a coiled readiness that set Li Wei's instincts on edge. It's done, Zhao said, his voice flat. The regional inspector received the final packet this afternoon. Zhang won't see sunrise as a free man. Li Wei nodded, keeping his distance. The mandate grinder interface flickered at the edge of his vision, showing Zhao's stats, authority 42, prestige 28, legitimacy 31. Lower than expected after their month of work. And the villagers? The evidence about the bridge construction funds? Already circulating through 3 tea houses, Zhao replied, taking a step closer. By dawn, even the rats in the magistrate's compound will know he stole from famine relief. Something was wrong. Li Wei's advanced strategy skill, freshly integrated after completing the network quest, sent warning signals through his mind. Zhao's movements were too deliberate, his gaze too fixed. The clerk's right hand kept drifting toward the inner fold of his robe. "We should disperse," Li Wei said, taking a careful step back toward the mill's shadowed interior. "The Imperial soldiers will be." Zhao moved. It wasn't a physical attack at first. The clerk's eyes glazed over with an unnatural blue light, and a wave of disorientation hit Li Wei like a physical blow. The mandate grinder interface, usually a constant presence at the periphery of his awareness, flickered violently before dissolving into static. His stats vanished. The comforting numbers that showed his authority at 58, prestige at 44, legitimacy at 52, all gone, leaving only a terrifying emptiness. "Interface suppression," Zhao hissed, drawing a slender dagger from his robe. "A little trick I learned before Zhang dismissed me. 30 minutes without your precious numbers. Let's see how well you fight blind." Li Wei's mind raced even as his body reacted. Without the interface, he couldn't see Zhao's remaining health, couldn't gauge the exact threat level. But the physical enhancements from months of siphoning mandate remained, the increased strength that had let him lift stones farmers twice his size struggled with, the agility that made dodging tax collectors' clumsy grabs effortless. He ducked as Zhao lunged, the dagger slicing air where his throat had been. The movement felt different without the visual feedback of agility points decreasing with each exertion, but his muscles remembered. He rolled behind a broken grinding stone, the rough granite scraping his palms. "You planned this from the beginning," Li Wei said, keeping his voice steady even as his heart hammered against his ribs. He edged along the mill's interior wall, using the deep shadows for cover. His basic stealth technique, honed through weeks of evading Imperial patrols, came naturally now. "Of course," Zhao spat, circling with predator's patience. "Why share mandate when I can take yours too? Zhang's downfall gives me enough to start fresh elsewhere. Your accumulated stats, they'll make me a power in whatever province I choose." Li Wei's fingers found a loose stone in the mill's foundation. He weighed it in his hand, about 2 pounds, jagged on one edge. His advanced logistics skill calculated trajectories automatically. If Zhao approached from the left, the stone would hit his temple at this angle with enough force to stun. But Zhao didn't approach. Instead, the clerk reached into a pouch at his belt and scattered something across the floor, tiny metal shards that gleamed in the moonlight. Caltrops. Li Wei recognized them from descriptions in Agent Wang's network reports. Imperial infantry used them to slow fleeing suspects. "Clever," Li Wei murmured. He began moving toward the broken water wheel mechanism, his mind working through possibilities. The suppression skill had a time limit, 30 minutes, Zhao said. He needed to survive until then, or find another advantage. Zhao advanced, stepping carefully around his own trap. "You rely too much on that glitched interface. Without it, you're just a peasant playing at rebellion." The word stung because they held truth. For months, Li Wei had watched numbers rise and fall, had planned his actions around stat gains and quest rewards. Now, fighting in silence without the system's feedback, he felt oddly free. And terrified. He reached the water wheel's central axle, a massive wooden beam thicker than his torso, partially rotted but still solid. His farming experience told him the wood would splinter under sufficient force. His advanced strategy skill suggested a dozen ways to use it. "Come out, Li Wei," Zhao called, his voice echoing in the mill's hollow interior. "I'll make it quick. More merciful than what the censorate will do when they catch you." Li Wei didn't answer. Instead, he placed both hands against the axle and pushed with all his enhanced strength. The wood groaned, protesting years of decay. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then, with a crack that sounded like thunder in the confined space, the axle snapped. The water wheel, unbalanced for decades, collapsed inward. Zhao screamed, a raw, animal sound of surprise and pain as tons of wood and iron crashed down around him. He managed to leap backward, but not fast enough. A spinning paddle caught his leg, and Li Wei heard the sickening crunch of breaking bone. Now. Li Wei moved from the shadows, scooping up one of the fallen metal shards as he went. Zhao lay pinned under debris, his right leg bent at an unnatural angle. Blood soaked his trousers. The dagger had fallen from his grasp, landing just out of reach. 30 minutes, Li Wei said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through him. How much longer? Zhao's eyes widened. The blue light had faded from them, replaced by pain and dawning realization. 15, maybe less. The skill drains my own mandate to maintain. Li Wei knelt, keeping the metal shard ready. Why betray me? We could have worked together against bigger targets. Because this is what the system teaches us. Zhao spat blood. Grinders grind. Everything is fuel, officials, the empire, each other. You'll learn. Or you'll die. At that moment, the static in Li Wei's vision cleared. The mandate grinder interface snapped back into existence with violent intensity. Numbers flooded his awareness, his own stats unchanged, Zhao's now visible with new data, health 23 100ths, mandate reserves 18/100. But something else appeared too, glowing with urgent crimson light at the center of his interface. Crisis detected, hostile grinder engagement. Emergency protocol activated. Mandate absorption skill unlocked, beta version. Warning, unstable. Use may cause system instability. Li Wei didn't hesitate. The skill felt instinctual, a deep hunger he hadn't known he possessed. He reached toward Zhao, not physically but with something else, some part of his awareness that the glitched system had awakened. Zhao screamed again, this time in metaphysical agony. Visible streams of golden light, authority, prestige, legitimacy, pulled from his body into Li Wei's. The clerk's stats plummeted, authority 4219, prestige 2811, legitimacy 3114. Li Wei's own numbers surged in response, authority 5867, prestige 4451, legitimacy 5259. The influx of power was intoxicating, overwhelming. For a moment, he understood Zhao's greed, this felt better than any official's downfall, more personal, more complete. Then the backlash hit. Pain exploded behind Li Wei's eyes, white-hot and searing. The interface flickered violently, numbers scrambling into nonsense before stabilizing. New notifications appeared, tinged with system error warnings. Absorption complete, 27 mandate points transferred. System instability detected, interface may glitch randomly for 48 hours. Injury assessment, moderate, recommend rest and medical attention. Li Wei staggered back, clutching his head. Blood trickled from his nose, warm and metallic on his lips. His body ached in places he hadn't known could hurt, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that went beyond physical fatigue. Zhao moaned, barely conscious now. His remaining mandate points glowed faintly, too depleted for Li Wei to absorb more even if he wanted to. Which, looking at the broken man, he found he didn't. Go, Li Wei managed through gritted teeth. Before I change my mind. Zhao didn't need telling twice. With a strength born of desperation, he dragged himself from beneath the debris, leaving a trail of blood as he crawled toward the mill's entrance. His broken leg scraped against stone, but he didn't stop. Within minutes, he had vanished into the night. Li Wei collapsed against a wall, breathing hard. The immediate danger had passed, but the cost. He examined himself as best he could. A deep gash on his forearm from flying debris. Bruises forming along his ribs where he'd slammed against the wall during the fight. And the system instability, already, his interface flickered, showing his authority as 67 one moment, 42 the next, before correcting itself. He sat there for what felt like hours, watching moonlight trace patterns across the ruined mill floor. The revelation settled in his mind like cold stone, grinders could prey on each other. The system encouraged it. Everything he'd built, the network, the skills, the carefully accumulated mandate, could be stolen by someone with the right ability and enough ruthlessness. Footsteps approached, careful but deliberate. Li Wei tensed, reaching for the metal shard again. It's me, Agent Wang's voice came from the darkness. The Sensorate agent emerged from shadow, his expression grim. He took in the destruction, the collapsed water wheel, the bloodstains, Li Wei's injuries. I felt the mandate disturbance from 2 li away. What happened? Zhao betrayed me, Li Wei said simply. Tried to take everything. Wang nodded as if he'd expected this. Magistrate Zhang was arrested at dawn. The emperor's men took him personally, no trial, straight to the capital. He paused, his next words dropping like stones into still water. But that's not why I'm here. The Emperor has taken personal interest in the mandate disturbances in this region. Not just Zhang's fall, all of it. The famine relief scandal, the bandit problem solved too neatly, the network of low-level dissent, and now this. He gestured at the mill. 2 grinders fighting leaves a signature. They'll trace it. Li Wei pushed himself upright, wincing as his injuries protested. How long? Days. Maybe a week if we're lucky. Wang's eyes held something Li Wei hadn't seen before, genuine fear. The Emperor doesn't just want you stopped. He wants to understand the glitch. To use it. The moonlight seemed to grow colder. Somewhere in the distance, a night bird called, its cry lonely in the vast darkness. Li Wei looked at his hands, a peasant's hands, still calloused from farm work, now stained with blood both literal and metaphysical. The long grind ahead had just become infinitely more dangerous. And somewhere in the imperial palace, an emperor who controlled the largest mandate in the empire had turned his gaze toward a single, wounded peasant. The morning sun painted the village in hues of gold and amber as Li Wei walked down the familiar dirt path. 3 days had passed since Magistrate Zhang's arrest, and the air itself seemed lighter, the oppressive weight of corruption lifted like a fog burned away by dawn. Villagers paused in their work, Old Man Chen tending his vegetable patch, Widow Feng hanging laundry with her infant daughter strapped to her back, Farmer Wu sharpening a hoe, all turning to watch him pass. Their eyes held not fear, but something new, respect, gratitude, even awe. Li Wei felt the change in his own body, a subtle hum of power beneath his skin. His injuries from the fight with Zhao still ached, a bruised rib, a shallow cut along his forearm, but the system instability had faded after 48 hours of random glitches that made his vision flicker with phantom stat screens. Now, his mandate grinder interface was stable, displaying his current stats with crisp clarity, authority 67, prestige 51, legitimacy 59. The numbers glowed with a steady light, a testament to the mandate he'd absorbed from Zhao and the vacuum left by Zhang's downfall. As he reached the village square, a crowd began to gather. Clerk Zhao, not the betrayer, but the magistrate's former assistant, stood nervously by the abandoned magistrate's office, a small wooden building with peeling red paint and a broken door hanging on one hinge. The clerk's own stats were pitifully low, authority 4, prestige 6, legitimacy 3. Li Wei's interface highlighted the office itself as an interactive object, its residual mandate shimmering like heat haze, vacant magistrate position, authority 15, prestige 8, legitimacy 12. A prompt flickered, grind available, perform actions that undermine imperial authority in this jurisdiction to absorb stats. Li Wei didn't need the prompt. He'd spent the last 2 nights planning, his newly acquired advanced strategy skill weaving scenarios and contingencies. The Emperor's gaze was coming, Agent Wang's warning echoed in his mind, and every move had to be calculated. He nodded to Clerk Zhao, who flinched slightly. The villagers have questions, Master Li, the clerk said, using an honorific that felt both strange and fitting. About taxes, about the irrigation dispute with Hong's family, about everything. Li Wei raised a hand, and the murmuring crowd fell silent. He could feel their attention like a physical force, a current of prestige flowing toward him. The magistrate is gone, he said, his voice carrying without strain. But the land remains. The people remain. He paused, letting the words settle. For now, I propose we handle matters ourselves. No new taxes until the harvest is properly assessed. The irrigation dispute, Farmer Wu, Hong, come forward. The 2 men stepped out, their postures tense. Li Wei listened as they argued over water rights, his mind working through his advanced logistics skill. The solution was simple, a rotation schedule based on field size and crop type, but he presented it as a collective decision, guiding the villagers to agree. As they did, his interface flashed, authority +2 from resolving local dispute without imperial intervention. The vacant office's authority stat dropped from 15 to 13. Over the next week, Li Wei worked from dawn until dusk, not in the fields with his advanced farming technique, but in the spaces between people. He mediated a boundary conflict between Old Man Chen and a neighbor, using his intermediate persuasion skill to find compromise. He organized a repair of the village's crumbling well, directing labor with an efficiency that made the work feel light. Each action was small, but each chipped away at the office's mandate. By the seventh day, the stats read, vacant magistrate position, authority 5, prestige 3, legitimacy 4. His own had risen to authority 71, prestige 55, legitimacy 63. Then the imperial messenger arrived. A rider in lacquered armor galloped into the village, scattering chickens and drawing every eye. He dismounted before Li Wei, who stood outside the old office, and delivered a scroll with a terse bow. By order of the Son of Heaven, Imperial Investigator Eunuch Li will arrive tomorrow to assess the situation in this jurisdiction. All are to prepare for his inquiry. The rider remounted and left as quickly as he came, leaving a silence thick with apprehension. Li Wei unrolled the scroll. The words were formal, but the subtext screamed danger. Eunuch Li. A name from rumors Agent Wang had shared, a high-ranking palace eunuch with a reputation for ruthlessness and a suspected system detection skill. Li Wei's interface flickered, as if sensing the threat, but showed no new data. He spent the night awake, his strategy skill running through possibilities. Direct confrontation was suicide. Hiding was impossible, the village knew him too well. The only path was misdirection, a performance so convincing it would mask the truth. At midday, Eunuch Li arrived. He came not with soldiers, but with a small retinue of 4 attendants, all moving with silent precision. Eunuch Li himself was a slender man in rich blue robes, his face smooth and ageless, his eyes dark pools that missed nothing. Li Wei's mandate grinder flared to life as the eunuch approached, displaying stats that made his breath catch, Eunuch Li, authority 89, prestige 76, legitimacy 82. A secondary line glowed red, system detection active, high risk of exposure if mandate usage is detected. Li Wei bowed deeply, keeping his interface minimized to a faint peripheral glow. Welcome, honored investigator. This humble village is honored by your presence. Eunuch Li's gaze swept over him, lingering for a heartbeat too long. You are Li Wei, he said, his voice soft but carrying. The peasant who exposed Magistrate Zhang's corruption. It wasn't a question. The magistrate's crimes were known to many, Li Wei replied carefully. I merely helped the truth find its voice. Eunuch Li smiled, a thin curve of lips that didn't reach his eyes. Modesty. A rare trait. He turned to the village square, where the entire population had gathered, drawn by the spectacle. I am here to determine how this jurisdiction will be administered. The position of magistrate is vacant. Who among you is fit to serve? Li Wei felt the moment crystallize. His strategy skill had predicted this, a public test. He stepped forward, his heart pounding but his expression calm. Honored investigator, if I may speak. At Eunuch Li's nod, he addressed the crowd, his voice rising to carry. We are simple farmers. We know the land, the seasons, the weight of a good harvest. What do we know of imperial administration? Magistrate Zhang ruled with greed, and the empire suffered for it. He paused, meeting the eyes of old man Chen, widow Feng, farmer Wu. I propose a different path. Let the village govern itself. Let elders like old man Chen advise on disputes. Let farmers like farmer Wu manage resources. Let us prove that loyalty to the empire does not require a corrupt intermediary. As he spoke, he activated his mandate absorption skill subtly, not targeting Eunuch Li, that would be instant detection, but focusing on the vacant office. The last remnants of its mandate shimmered and flowed toward him, authority 5, prestige 3, legitimacy 4. His stats surged, authority 7176, prestige 5558, legitimacy 6367. The office's stats zeroed out, the building now just wood and nails, its metaphysical power fully absorbed. Eunuch Li watched, his expression unreadable. An interesting proposal, he said slowly. But the empire requires order. Who will ensure taxes are paid? Who will enforce laws? Li Wei bowed again. We will. Together. Under the watchful eye of the Son of Heaven, we will show that a community can be both obedient and self-reliant. He could feel the prestige radiating from the villagers, their hope and trust fueling his own power. His interface flashed, regional influence perk unlocked, +5 to all stats when operating within this jurisdiction, increased network growth rate. For a long moment, Eunuch Li said nothing. He walked a slow circle around Li Wei, his system detection skill almost palpable in the air. Li Wei kept his interface suppressed, his mind focused on the image of a humble, loyal peasant. Finally, the eunuch stopped. Very well. The Empire will observe this experiment. For now. He turned to his attendants. Prepare to depart. Relief washed through Li Wei, tempered by caution. He had avoided exposure, completed his local ascension, and gained a powerful perk. But as Eunuch Li mounted his horse, he looked back, his dark eyes locking with Li Wei's. The villagers began to disperse, chattering with nervous excitement, but Li Wei stood frozen. Eunuch Li's voice cut through the noise, soft yet carrying like a blade. The Son of Heaven has seen your stats. A pause, heavy with implication. You are now a person of interest. Then he rode away, leaving Li Wei standing in the square, the sun casting long shadows as the weight of those words settled over him like a shroud. The morning sun cast long shadows across the village square where Li Wei stood, watching Old Man Chen direct a group of men repairing the irrigation channel. For 3 months now, since Magistrate Zhang's arrest and Eunuch Li's departure, this had been his reality, a delicate dance between open leadership and hidden grinding. Li Wei's fingers traced the invisible interface only he could see. His stats glowed softly, Authority 76, Prestige 58, Legitimacy 67. The Regional Influence perk added a subtle +5 to each within this jurisdiction, making him feel the weight of the land beneath his feet like an extension of his own body. But it was the network growth that truly mattered, the web of connections spreading beyond his village to 3 neighboring settlements. Li Wei. Widow Feng approached, her infant daughter balanced on her hip. The granary inventory is complete. We have enough rice to last through winter, plus the surplus from the northern fields. He nodded, his advanced logistics skill automatically calculating distribution patterns. Set aside 20% for trade with River Bend Village. Clerk Xiao's replacement there is corrupt, we can siphon authority by proving his mismanagement. As Widow Feng departed, Li Wei's interface flickered. A new quest appeared in shimmering characters. Quest, secure regional base. Establish a self-sufficient community immune to imperial overreach. Reward, 10 wisdom points, unlock, mandate fortification, skill. Li Wei's breath caught. This wasn't just another grinding opportunity, it was a foundation. He could feel the system's logic, by creating something the Empire couldn't touch, he'd be grinding its very premise of control. Over the next week, Li Wei moved through his days with calculated precision. Each morning, he met with Farmer Wu and Hong to resolve disputes, a stolen chicken here, a boundary disagreement there. With each resolution, he felt the faintest trickle of mandate, like water seeping into parched soil. The vacant magistrate position still held residual power, and his actions as unofficial leader drained it steadily. But the real work happened in the shadows. Using his advanced strategy skill, Li Wei identified 3 distant nobles with exploitable weaknesses. Lord Gao remained the primary target, his low legitimacy made him vulnerable, but 2 others appeared on Li Wei's radar through network rumors, Lady Xue in the western province, whose excessive taxation had sparked unrest, and General Ma in the southern garrison, whose troops grumbled about withheld pay. Proxy actions, Li Wei murmured to himself one evening, studying his interface by candlelight. He couldn't travel to these distant places, but he could orchestrate events. Through carefully planted rumors carried by traveling merchants, through forged documents that would find their way to the right hands, through subtle encouragement of existing discontent. The first test came with Lady Xue. Li Wei spent 3 nights crafting a series of anonymous letters, using the handwriting techniques Zhao had taught him before the betrayal. He didn't forge evidence, that was too risky, but he framed existing facts in damning ways. When the letters reached the provincial capital through his network, Lady Xue's authority dropped by 4 points overnight. Li Wei felt the transfer as a warm surge, his own authority climbing to 80. But maintaining this dual existence exhausted him. By day, he was the village leader organizing repairs to the mill, mediating disputes, and planning crop rotations. By night, he was the grinder, studying imperial reports stolen from passing couriers, mapping power structures, and calculating which actions would yield the most mandate with the least risk. You look tired, son. Old Man Chen found him one afternoon staring at the newly repaired irrigation channel. The water flowed smoothly now, a testament to Li Wei's organizational skills. The work is never done, Li Wei said truthfully. It's more than that. Chen's eyes held knowing wisdom. You carry the weight of things unseen. Li Wei didn't deny it. His regional influence perk made the villagers subtly more loyal, more willing to follow his lead, but it didn't erase their perception entirely. They saw his unnatural competence, his ability to anticipate problems before they arose. As autumn deepened into early winter, Li Wei's quest progressed in measurable increments. He organized a rotating militia for village defense, training farmers in basic formations during the slack season. He established a barter system with neighboring villages that bypassed imperial tax collectors. He even convinced Widow Feng to start teaching the children basic characters during the cold months. Education was a form of independence the empire couldn't easily control. Each action fed the quest. The interface showed progress, regional base security, 42%. But the resource management strained him. Food stores needed balancing against trade needs. Skilled laborers had to be allocated between immediate repairs and long-term projects. And always, he had to monitor for imperial attention. One crisp morning, a traveler arrived with news that made Li Wei's blood run cold. "They're saying in River Bend that the emperor has dispatched investigators to every province," the man reported over shared porridge. "Something about stabilizing the mandate after disturbances." Li Wei kept his expression neutral, but his mind raced. Eunuch Li's warning echoed, "The emperor has senior stats, direct conflict would be suicide." His authority of 82 was nothing against imperial might. But the quest demanded he create something the investigators couldn't dismantle. For the next month, Li Wei shifted tactics. He used his intermediate persuasion skill to frame every action as loyal service to the empire. When he organized grain storage, he spoke of preparing for imperial needs. When he trained the militia, he called it supplementing imperial defense. The words tasted bitter, but they provided cover. Simultaneously, he intensified his proxy grinding. General Ma's pay scandal broke when anonymous tips reached the right officers. The general's prestige plummeted by 11 points, and Li Wei absorbed 7 of them, his own prestige climbing to 65. But the effort left him drained. Maintaining the fiction of loyalty while systematically undermining imperial figures required mental gymnastics that strained even his enhanced intellect. By the time the first snow dusted the fields, Li Wei's quest reached 78% completion. His village and 2 neighboring settlements now functioned as an interconnected unit. They shared resources, coordinated defense, and maintained their own records separate from imperial ledgers. The system recognized this growing independence as a form of resistance. The final push came unexpectedly. A dispute erupted between his village and a 4th settlement over hunting rights in the border woods. Normally, such matters would go to a magistrate, but there was no magistrate, only Li Wei's unofficial authority. He spent 3 days negotiating, using every ounce of his advanced strategy and persuasion skills. He didn't just resolve the dispute, he created a shared management system for the woods, complete with rotating stewardship and conflict resolution protocols. It was governance without the empire. As the agreement was sealed with handshakes and shared wine, Li Wei's interface flashed brightly. Quest complete, secure regional base, warmth flooded through him, different from mandate absorption, this was deeper, settling into his mind rather than his stats. Reward, 10 wisdom points. Unlocking mandate fortification skill, ***. New knowledge unfolded in his consciousness. Mandate fortification, the ability to reinforce absorbed mandate, making it harder for others to steal, and to create localized zones where imperial power weakened. It was a defensive skill, perfect for protecting what he'd built. That night, Li Wei stood alone on the hill overlooking his village and the 3 connected settlements. Lights glimmered in the darkness, homes where people slept secure, knowing their harvest was stored, their children learning, their disputes handled locally. He had achieved what the quest demanded, a self-sufficient community slowly becoming immune to imperial overreach. His stats now read, Authority 85, Prestige 68, Legitimacy 72. The regional influence perk hummed steadily. The network extended to 5 settlements. He had avoided direct conflict with the emperor, focusing on long-term growth at the periphery where imperial attention was weakest. As he looked up at the night sky, stars glittering cold and distant, his interface glitched. The familiar display of his own stats flickered, replaced for a single heartbeat by something vast and terrible. A stat bar so long it seemed to stretch across the heavens themselves, glowing with oppressive golden light, Emperor's Mandate, 10,000/10,000. Beneath it, crimson characters pulsed, warning, direct engagement fatal. Then it was gone, his normal interface restored. The cold night air bit at Li Wei's cheeks. He stood motionless for a long moment, the overwhelming scale of what he faced settling in his bones. Slowly, a smile touched his lips. Not of fear, but of recognition. The numbers were impossible, the gap insurmountable through direct confrontation. But he wasn't planning a battle, he was planning a grind. A slow, patient, relentless erosion of those 10,000 points, one corrupt official, one undermined institution, one independent community at a time. He turned his back on the stars and walked down toward the village lights. The work would continue tomorrow. The long game had always been the only game. And now, with a fortified base and growing network, he had secured his first true foothold. The grind had just begun.